The story begins with a young love, gentle, innocent. Their future seemed full of promise. But without warning, she suddenly disappeared, especially when her child was about to be born. What started as a missing person case soon spiraled into one of the most shocking and heartbreaking crimes the Dominican Republic had ever seen. This is the story of Emily Peguero, a story of love, betrayal, and a desperate fight for justice that would shake an entire country. Emily was born on July 12, 2001, in Cinaví, a small town about an hour's drive from Santo Domingo, the capital of the Dominican Republic. She was the youngest child of Adalgisa Polanco and Gennaro Peguero. Even as she grew older, her older siblings continued to treat her like their little baby, constantly shielding her from life's hardships. Pretty, cheerful, and kind-hearted Emily, with her signature dimples, dreamed of becoming a lawyer one day. She wanted to help those who couldn't afford expensive legal representation. Growing up in a humble household, she promised herself that she would work pro bono to bring justice to people like her own family. Emily was deeply empathetic and always sought to make the world a better place in whatever small way she could. The Peguero family lived in a modest house with shuttered windows, a flat roof, and a faded butterfly mural painted across the front wall. Her parents worked multiple low-paying jobs just to make ends meet. Despite the lack of luxuries, Emily was always provided with what mattered most: love, care, and a sense of security. The family's financial struggles never dimmed her spirit. She is very good at studying, friendly and outgoing, enjoys spending time with friends and family. Emily enjoyed applying stage makeup, dressing up in costumes, and putting on little performances to make her loved ones laugh. For her parents, all the daily worries disappeared whenever they watched their youngest daughter dancing and smiling. The Peguero family might not have had much, but they were rich in love, warmth. That was enough. When Emily turned 15, she began dating a boy named Marlon Martinez, who was 18 at the time. They had known each other since childhood, and their relationship had blossomed from a gentle friendship into young love. Marlon had been born in the United States, but when he was around 8 or 9 years old, his family returned to the Dominican Republic and settled in a large house with a manicured front yard, directly across from Emily's humble home. His mother and stepfather were financially well off, sending him to a prestigious private school in the suburbs. Marlon's mother, Marlon Martinez, was a prominent political figure. At one point, she had even served as the deputy mayor of the province. At the time of the events, she worked for the government, handling visa and passport services and participating in various political campaigns. This position gave her access to influential people and powerful connections. Rumors circulated that Marlon often used her authority to help certain individuals obtain documents illegally, that many people owed her favors. She was never held accountable, as there was always someone protecting her from the consequences. To be honest, Marlon was not a pleasant woman. Emily's father, who had once worked as a private security guard for her, knew firsthand how aggressive, short-tempered she could be. She acted as if her money and influence placed her above everyone else. The townspeople whispered behind her back, calling her the devil for her arrogance, cruelty. Driven by political ambition and career demands, Marlon often needed help caring for her 3 sons, including Marlon. Instead of hiring a professional nanny, she turned to her neighbor, Adalgisa, Emily's mother, and paid Adalgisa to look after the boys while she worked. Every morning, Marlon would send her children across the street to Adalgisa's house, where they spent hours under her care. The children from both families quickly became inseparable, spending long afternoons playing together in the quiet neighborhood. The Martinez boys often slept overnight at the Peguero home, a sign that Marlon had great confidence in Adalgisa's care for her sons. Despite their stark social differences, the two families developed a surprisingly close bond through these everyday interactions. For years, all the children treated one another like siblings. But as they grew older, life slowly pulled them in different directions, and their once frequent visits became occasional. When Emily turned 15 and Marlon was 18, the two reconnected. At first, they were simply spending time together, reminiscing about their childhood. But soon, friendship turned into something deeper, a secret romance. The legal age of marriage in the Dominican Republic is 18, and Emily is still a minor. Her family disapproved, mostly because of Marlon's mother. Marlon was known for her arrogance and temper. She had recently quarreled with another neighbor over a trivial issue, further damaging her reputation. Yet Marlon himself seemed nothing like his mother. He was polite, quiet, and, in a way, almost like a member of the Peguero family. Emily's father, Gennaro, does not like this relationship but cannot stop it. His daughter was clearly in love, and he didn't want to push her away. However, deep down, Gennaro still felt uneasy, mainly because he knew what kind of person Marlon was. By 2017, as Emily's 16th birthday approached, her relationship with Marlon seemed stable. They were young, happy, and hopeful about the future. But that spring, something unexpected happened. Emily began to feel unwell and didn't understand why. Marlon, being older, quickly realized what might be going on. A few tests later, their fears were confirmed. Emily was pregnant. The news shocked both of them. In the Dominican Republic, abortion is prohibited in nearly all circumstances. It's considered a criminal offense, and since 2012, anyone assisting in an abortion, doctors, friends, or family can face prison time. Emily, terrified and confused, knew she would have to carry the baby to term. She herself was still a child, not knowing how she could raise another child. Marlon tried to reassure her, promising that everything would be fine. But Emily was terrified to tell her parents. She didn't know how they would react: disappointment, anger, shame. Eventually, she gathered her courage and confided in her mother and older sister. Her father didn't find out until much later. One afternoon, about 5 months into the pregnancy, Gennaro came home during his lunch break. As he entered the kitchen, he noticed the uneasy looks on his wife's and daughter's faces. When he asked what was wrong, Adalgisa told him the truth. Their youngest daughter was 5 months pregnant. For a few moments, he couldn't speak. He was heartbroken, angry, and scared all at once. After half an hour of silence, he finally told his wife he would talk to the young couple, but that he needed time to process the news first. Tragically, Gennaro would never get that chance. He learned about Emily's pregnancy just 9 days before she disappeared. About a week later, Roberto Cabrera, Marlon's stepfather, visited Gennaro, suggested they meet to discuss the baby's future. Gennaro agreed. Together with Marlon and Roberto, they sat down to talk. Marlon assured Gennaro that he would take responsibility for the child and care for Emily. Roberto also promised to support the child in any way possible. That conversation eased Gennaro's worries somewhat, though he still struggled to accept that his little girl was about to become a mother. He set one condition: Emily and the baby would stay with Peguero family after the birth, since she was still a minor. Both families would share the responsibility of caring for the child until Emily turned 18. Marlon seemed to agree, and Roberto supported the plan. But there was one person who was far from happy about the situation: Marlon. For her, her son's relationship with a poor teenage girl and pregnancy was not only inconvenient, it was an embarrassment she wanted to erase at any cost. She believed Marlon throwing his future away. In her mind, this child would ruin everything: his education, his ambitions, and the family's spotless reputation. Marlon feared what people would say if they learned that her son, from a respectable and well-off household, had gotten a girl from a modest background pregnant. She had tolerated their teenage relationship in silence, convincing herself it was just a passing phase. But pregnancy, in her eyes, was an unforgivable mistake. On the morning of August 23, 2017, 16-year-old Emily woke up earlier than usual. Adalgisa noticed and asked where she was headed so early. Emily smiled softly and said that Marlon had promised to take her to a doctor's appointment to pick up her test results. Adalgisa saw her to the front door, watched Emily get into Marlon's car and drive away, completely unaware that it would be the last time she saw her daughter alive. The morning passed quietly. Adalgisa prepared breakfast, cleaned the house, and waited for Emily to return. But as the clock ticked past the hour, a faint sense of unease began to creep in. Emily was always punctual, and if she were delayed, she would at least send a message or call. By late morning, Adalgisa's unease had grown into panic. At 11:30 a.m., Emily's sister received a strange text message. It said that Marlon had dropped Emily off at a gas station because she wanted to meet her uncle. The message should have been reassuring, but instead, it sent chills down their spines. Emily never sent texts. She preferred voice messages. And she had never mentioned meeting her uncle before. Even the tone of the message was off. It didn't sound like her at all. Something was terribly wrong. Desperate for answers, Adalgisa sent her older daughter to Martinez's house. When Marlon opened the door, he appeared calm and explained that on their way to the clinic, Emily realized she had mixed up the dates. The test results wouldn't be ready until Friday. According to him, Emily then asked to be dropped off at a gas station because she was meeting her uncle. He said he gave her some money, watched her get in the car and drive away. That, he said, was the last time he saw her. But Adalgisa didn't believe him. Together with her elder daughter, she rushed to the gas station and asked the employees to review the security footage. What they saw confirmed their worst fears. There was no sign of Emily or Marlon at the station that morning. Either Marlon had made a mistake or he was lying. Yet, when confronted again, Marlon stubbornly repeated his story. By the afternoon, Adalgisa's panic had turned into full-blown terror. She called the police to report her pregnant teenage daughter missing. The family began printing and distributing flyers with Emily's face, hoping someone had seen her. Deep down, though, they didn't believe she had been kidnapped by a stranger. They were certain the answer lay much closer to home with Marlon and his mother. When speaking to reporters, Adalgisa didn't hide her suspicions. Her husband, Gennaro, had recently discovered disturbing messages on Emily's phone, texts from Marlon's mother sent 4 days before Emily disappeared. The messages showed that she had been pressuring Emily to terminate her pregnancy, offering to help her end it quietly at home. She promised that everything would go smoothly, that Emily had nothing to fear. Emily initially refused, but after days of emotional pressure, she seemed to give in, agreeing to let Marlon assist her. For Emily's parents, those messages were proof of a sinister plan. They believed Marlon was desperate to erase the shame of an unplanned pregnancy, no matter the cost. When Gennaro handed those messages to investigators, suspicion toward the Martinez family intensified. What shocked everyone most was that Marlon immediately hired a lawyer, something no innocent teenager would do. The gesture spoke volumes, suggesting guilt, not grief. After the first 24 hours passed with no sign of Emily, fear spread throughout the neighborhood. Rumors began to swirl. Everyone whispered that the Martinez family had something to do with her disappearance. At home, Gennaro was a man shattered. He couldn't stop imagining what might have happened to his daughter, whether she was cold, hurt, or terrified somewhere, calling out for help he couldn't give. Alone, he cried quietly, his body trembling with despair. But in front of his family, he forced himself to stay strong. He knew that if they saw him break down, their hope would shatter completely. After news of Emily, the missing pregnant girl, spread throughout the community, rumors of her boyfriend's family's involvement began to circulate. Marlon and his mother decided to hold a press conference to deny the rumors and clear their name. Using her wide network of contacts, Marlon invited several reporters to attend, hoping to quickly put an end to the public suspicions surrounding her family. The conference was held in the living room of the Martinez family home. Marlon appeared in a simple t-shirt and jeans, visibly uneasy. Throughout the interview, he kept his head down, his hands trembling as he spoke. His mother, on the other hand, was the complete opposite, elegantly dressed in a formal suit, with her hair perfectly styled, exuding confidence and authority. Having previously served as a deputy and local government official, she was accustomed to addressing the public. Even so, the first questions were directed at her son. Marlon recounted the same story he had told before. Then, for the first time, he looked straight into the camera and pleaded for Emily to return home. He admitted that, like any couple, they had problems, but insisted that their families had accepted the unexpected pregnancy and were excited for the baby's arrival. After he finished, Marlon took over the conversation, firmly denying every accusation against her family. She claimed that neither she nor her son had anything to do with Emily's disappearance, asserting that on that same morning, Marlon had accompanied Emily's grandmother to the consulate to handle paperwork, an attempt to present an alibi and emphasize how close the two families supposedly were. During the press event, Marlon repeatedly stressed that Emily was like part of their family and that they loved her deeply. She referred to Emily as the girl who carried her future grandchild, saying they were as worried for her safety as the Peguero family was. However, instead of clearing their names, the press conference only raised more suspicion. People found it odd that the Martinez family had not invited the Peguero family to speak as well. To the public, the event seemed less like a genuine plea for truth and more like a staged attempt at self-defense. Viewers also noticed a chilling detail. Both mother and son spoke about Emily in the past tense, as if they already knew she was dead. This small but telling slip convinced many that they knew far more about what had happened than they were admitting. Soon, public opinion turned completely against them. Many came to believe it was a classic case of a wealthy, powerful family silencing a poor young girl to protect their reputation. Instead of calming speculation, the press conference had only fueled the outrage. Despite the mounting tension, Marlon decided to visit the Peguero family home. Seeing their grief-stricken faces, he realized there was no escaping the situation. Feeling cornered and fearing what would come next, he went to the police and turned himself in. On August 26, 2017, Marlon Martinez was officially arrested as the main suspect in Emily's disappearance and placed in a detention center. But the most crucial question remained unanswered. Was Emily still alive? 5 days after Emily went missing, on Monday, August 28, police had a breakthrough. They managed to trace Emily's phone signal to an apartment in the upscale San Francisco de Macorís district, an apartment belonging to Marlene Martinez. When officers conducted a search of the premises, they made a disturbing discovery: bloodstains on a mattress and several blood-soaked towels. All the evidence was immediately sent to a forensic laboratory for analysis. Everything now pointed toward one horrifying conclusion. Whatever had happened to Emily, it had happened inside that apartment. Meanwhile, the police continued questioning potential witnesses. August 30th, 2007, the security guard of the apartment building where the Martinez family owned a flat revealed shocking information. He said that on the day Emily disappeared, August 23rd, he saw Marlon Martinez on the surveillance cameras carrying a large bag out of the building and loading it into his car. Unsure of what to do, the guard decided to call Marlon. She came downstairs to see the footage for herself. While watching the video, she became visibly nervous. A short time later, the recording mysteriously vanished. Later that same day, Marlon confessed everything to the police. The Peguero family's worst fears were confirmed. Marlon admitted that Emily was dead. He told investigators that he had left her body at a local garbage dump. The news devastated not only Emily's loved ones, but also the entire community. Many people followed the story hoping that Emily was still alive, but Marlon's confession completely extinguished that hope. Police officers, along with Marlon, immediately went to the dump he had mentioned to search for Emily's body. When the patrol car stopped near the landfill, it was surrounded by an enraged crowd. People wanted to see the accused face to face and express their fury, grief. Officers had to fire warning shots into the air to disperse the mob. The police decided it was too dangerous to let Marlon out of the vehicle. For more than 8 hours, they sifted through piles of trash and debris, but found nothing. The next morning, August 31, 2017, the residents of Sinovi took to the streets in protest. At around 9 a.m., they blocked the roads, burned tires, and threw stones, demanding that Marlon stop playing games with the Peguero family's emotions and reveal the truth about where he had hidden Emily's body. The situation became so violent that police had to intervene to restore order. Public anger continued to grow, and much of it was directed toward Marlon's mother. Many people saw her as the mastermind behind Emily's disappearance. Those who knew the Marlon family were convinced that Marlene was using her wealth and influence to protect her son. Later that day, the prayers of Emily's parents and the townspeople were finally answered. A body had been discovered in Espaillat province, about an hour's drive from Sinovi. Emily's older brother received a flood of messages from friends and strangers alike, all saying that the body of an unidentified girl had been found nearby. The police, along with the Peguero family and relatives, rushed to the scene, desperate for answers. By the time they arrived, darkness had fallen. The only light came from police vehicles and flashlights. A crowd had gathered by the roadside. In the center lay a suitcase. Inside was the decomposing body of Emily Peguero, the 16-year-old who had been 5 months pregnant. The suitcase was opened. The body was carefully removed and transported to the medical examiner's office. The autopsy was carried out promptly. It revealed that Emily had died from internal bleeding, likely caused by a failed attempt to terminate her pregnancy. She'd also suffered a severe blow to the head from a blunt object. According to the forensic report, death had been almost instantaneous. She probably never had time to understand what was happening to her. When the autopsy results were made public, outrage erupted across the Dominican Republic. By that time, Emily's story had gone viral. Her photos, smiling in a red traditional Dominican dress, flooded social media. The tragedy captured worldwide attention, with celebrities sharing Emily's image and urging justice for the young girl. Her family has launched a campaign demanding the case not be buried or forgotten. Communities united to pressure the authorities and ensure that justice would prevail. Emily was laid to rest in a white casket, surrounded by hundreds of mourners holding pink balloons. Many brought flowers and small gifts to honor her memory and to support the grieving Peguero family. Meanwhile, police investigations revealed that Marlon had lied from the very beginning. He had never taken Emily to the gas station, as he had told her mother and the reporters. The text message sent from Emily's phone that morning was fake, written by Marlon himself to cover up what he had done. Instead of taking her to the clinic, Marlon drove Emily to his mother's empty apartment. There, he allegedly forced her to drink an unknown liquid intended to end her pregnancy. The substance caused internal bleeding. Emily began to panic. She may have tried to resist or escape, but in the struggle, Marlon shoved her too hard. Emily fell, struck her head, died almost instantly. Panicked, Marlon placed Emily's body in a large bag, carried it out of the apartment, and loaded it into his car. Surveillance cameras captured him at that moment. He drove aimlessly for a while, then, in desperation, threw the bag containing Emily's body from a bridge into a ravine. Afterward, he called his mother and confessed what he had done. Marlon was furious at him for handling the matter so carelessly. She promised to fix the situation and help make sure the body wouldn't be found. Later that same day, when the apartment building guard called and showed her the surveillance footage, she realized this evidence could destroy them both. From that point on, Marlon used all her influence to protect her son. Early on the morning of August 24th, Marlon met with her son and two accomplices to decide what to do with Emily's remains. Furious that Marlon had left the body in such an obvious place, she paid a man to help relocate it. The man went to the bridge, retrieved the bag, placed Emily's body into a suitcase, and dumped it on a roadside about an hour's drive from Senovi, hoping that by the time it was discovered, no one would link it to Emily's disappearance. In the following days, police arrested 4 additional people connected to the Martinezes, Marlon's brother, one of her close friends, and 2 employees. However, all 4 cooperated with the investigation, were later released after giving testimony. none were directly involved in the murder itself. Ultimately, only Marlon and Marlon Martinez stood trial for the killing of Emily Peguero. The trial was as tense as it was emotional. During the 9 months that followed Emily's death, each court session brought new drama. Defense lawyers withdrew one after another. Outside the courthouse, local activists protested daily. Whenever Marlon appeared in court, she wore a bulletproof vest and helmet to protect her from the furious crowd that wanted vengeance. The tension was so high that, without that protection, the mob might have torn her apart on the spot. In court in April 2018, emotions inside the courtroom ran dangerously high. Emily Peguero's father, Gennaro Peguero, was arrested after attempting to bring a firearm into the courthouse. His act was one of desperation, a heartbroken father who had lost faith in the system and could no longer bear the weight of his grief. When the prosecution decided to recreate the crime scene, they brought in the suitcase in which Emily's body had been found, along with her shoes and clothing. The odor of decay was so overpowering that the reenactment had to be conducted outdoors, in the courthouse parking lot. Under a scorching sun, prosecutors demonstrated how Emily's body had been folded and forced into the suitcase. For the Peguero family, watching this was almost unbearable. Already devastated, they were forced to relive the horror of how their daughter had been treated in death. Throughout the proceedings, the defense insisted that Marlon Martinez had never meant to kill Emily. But Marlon's story kept changing, each version contradicting the last. At first, he confessed to killing Emily and abandoning her body at the dump. Later, he claimed that Emily had taken a pill on her own, distraught over the pregnancy, and that her death was accidental. In a third version, he denied his mother's involvement altogether, claiming she didn't even know Emily was dead. These constant inconsistencies shattered his credibility completely. The Peguero family's attorney argued that when Marlon's attempt to induce an abortion failed, he panicked. Instead of taking Emily to the hospital and risking exposure, he decided it would be easier if she simply disappeared. He never expected her body to be found, nor the public to rise against him. The lawyer became a hero in the eyes of many Dominicans, boldly standing up to the powerful Martinez family and exposing their corruption. Of all the Peguero family, Adalgisa, Emily's older sister, suffered the deepest pain. She had once cared for Marlon and his siblings when they were children, feeding them, putting them to bed, and protecting them while their mother, Marlon, pursued her political career. For her, the betrayal was unthinkable. One of the very boys she had nurtured had grown up to take her baby sister's life. For the Peguero family, Emily's death was a devastating consequence of pride, class prejudice, and obsession with fame. The trial dragged on for months, every hearing more explosive than the last. In November 2018, a panel of 3 judges finally delivered their verdict. Marlon Martinez was found guilty of intentional homicide and sentenced to 30 years in prison. His mother, Marlon Martinez, was convicted of kidnapping and concealing a corpse, receiving a mere 5-year sentence. When the verdict was read, chaos erupted inside the courtroom. Angry shouts filled the air. People could not believe that a woman so deeply involved in Emily's disappearance would serve only 5 years behind bars. Protesters demanded that her sentence be increased to at least 20 years, but the court's ruling stood firm. Marlon's lawyer vowed to appeal, claiming he had never intended to kill Emily, that he had simply wanted to solve their problem and things had gone terribly wrong. The Martinez family was also ordered to pay financial compensation to the Peguero family, though everyone knew no amount of money could ever make up for their loss. Then came another devastating blow. On May 15, 2019, the appeals court reduced Marlon's sentence to just 2 years, arguing there was insufficient proof that she had committed a crime. To the Peguero family and the Dominican public, it was an outrage. The injustice didn't end there. In September 2020, another ruling effectively ordered Marlon's immediate release. Many suspected her powerful political connections had influenced the decision. When she walked out of the correctional facility, a furious crowd waited outside, shouting insults and demanding retribution. But she didn't look back. Soon after, Marlon left the Dominican Republic and quietly resettled somewhere in the United States, far from the rage she had left behind. Meanwhile, her son Marlon remained behind bars, though even prisons seemed to treat him gently. Rumors circulated that he had begun another relationship with a teenage girl and that guards occasionally allowed him to leave the facility unsupervised. Each new rumor was like another wound to the Peguero family's heart. For Emily's parents, nothing about the aftermath resembled justice. Their daughter, a bright 16-year-old who had dreamed of becoming a teacher, was gone. The people responsible for her death had managed to turn a story of brutality and loss into one more tale of power and privilege. Gennaro remembers how every morning before leaving for work, he would quietly step into his daughter's room, kiss her forehead, and whisper goodbye. It was a small ritual, something ordinary yet deeply precious now. That memory is what breaks him the most. In memory of his sister, Emily's brother wrote a 4-minute song recounting everything that happened to her: the love, the betrayal, and the unbearable loss. In the music video, the final scene shows him watching Marlon Martinez on television, pretending to cry at a press conference. Without saying a word, the brother stands up and smashes the TV screen. This action is a powerful symbol that reflects the anger and sadness felt by people across the country. Emily's bedroom remains exactly as she left it before her death. Red paper hearts are still taped to the headboard. Neon pink curtains flutter softly by the window. On her bedside table rest a few handmade bracelets, a small statue of Jesus, and a framed photo of the Pope. Inside her closet, her neatly folded clothes sit beside her collection of stuffed animals. The only new thing in the room is a collage of photos and farewell messages created by students from her school, a tribute to a young life stolen too soon. Across Latin America, femicide has reached devastating levels. Every year, around 200 women are murdered in the Dominican Republic alone, and that's only the official number. Many cases go unreported, buried in silence and fear. While police were searching for Emily's body, they discovered the remains of 2 other young women, both just 18. One was killed by her stepfather, the other by her boyfriend. Emily Peguero's death was only one among countless tragedies, but the brutality of her murder and the involvement of a politically connected family shook the entire nation. Her story represented resistance, grief, and the urgent need for justice in a society that frequently ignores such issues. Case of Tony Alexander King. Rocio Juaninkoff Hornos was born in 1979 in Spain and was the youngest of 3 siblings. Their parents divorced when Rocio was very young, and the children remained with their mother. Her mother, Alicia Hornos, raised her and her 2 older siblings, Rosa and Guillermo, in the town of Millas. Rocio was described as an angelic child. She had a positive outlook on life and was adept at finding solutions to challenges. She cared deeply for her mother and siblings. At that time, Rocio was also in a relationship with a boy who, according to many, loved her very much. However, everything changed on October 9, 1999. That day, Rocio spent the day and evening at her boyfriend's house, where his mother was also present. They decided to go to a fair in Fuengirola, a nearby village. Later that evening, around 9:30 p.m., Rocio chose to leave her boyfriend's house, saying she wanted to go home to shower and change before going to the fair. It was only a 500-meter walk back to her house, but something happened during her walk, and she never returned home. Rocio's mother thought her daughter had gone to the fair with her boyfriend or friends, so she didn't raise the alarm when Rocio didn't come home. Rosa and Guillermo were also waiting for Rocio at home, but hadn't heard from her either. When Rocio still hadn't returned by the next morning, Alicia became anxious. Alicia called Rocio's boyfriend. He said he hadn't seen Rocio and confirmed that they had planned to go to the fair, but that at the last moment, he fell asleep and didn't go anywhere. He mentioned that he had tried to call Rocio, but acquaintances said they hadn't seen her at the fair. He thought she had come home late and was very tired. Alicia was very worried because there had been no news about her daughter. Her anxiety grew until her partner Juan Chirillo suggested they take a walk to relieve some stress. He planned to show her some nearby ruins, hoping it would help her relax. Many people had reassured them that their daughter would return soon. As they walked, everything seemed normal, until Alicia spotted a pair of sneakers on the ground. She believed they belonged to her daughter. Continuing through the vacant lot, she became increasingly alarmed when she saw bloodstains and a piece of fabric. Feeling agitated, Alicia was convinced that something terrible had happened, so Juan called the police for assistance. The police arrived and secured the area to search for evidence. In addition to the sneakers, bloodstains, and fabric, they discovered tire tracks that had crossed over a puddle of blood, as well as a cigarette butt from a brand not commonly found in Spain. After analyzing the evidence, they found that the DNA from the cigarette butt did not match any records in the database, but they preserved the sample for future testing. The tire tracks indicated that the car involved was quite old and had not been made in Spain for 6 years. It was also determined to be a small vehicle. Since Rocio had practically vanished in the middle of the night, it was very difficult to find witnesses, especially since the area was not crowded. However, the first witness came forward after the evidence was collected. He was a taxi driver who reported that on the night of Rocio's disappearance, around 10 p.m., he was driving home from work and passed by the street where the evidence was found. He heard screams and became very scared, so he closed the windows of his car. The taxi driver also noticed a man inside an SUV and was able to provide a description of the man, which was used to create a composite sketch. The photo sketch was disseminated across all media outlets, so that people could provide information about this man if they knew anything. At the same time, the police were searching for this person in the nearby grove. In cases like this, the last person to see the victim, especially if they were a romantic partner, often becomes the main suspect. In this instance, that person was Jose Antonio Rios. The police examined his phone and interrogated him 6 times. His account raised suspicions for several reasons, one being that he couldn't recall what the victim was wearing that day. The victim's family provided information that contradicted Jose's statements. They stated that she was wearing a white t-shirt with a Nike logo and purple pants, but Jose insisted he had never seen her in that outfit. He claimed he was unfamiliar with the white t-shirt. Additionally, Jose's mother confirmed that the victim had been wearing a jacket when she left their house at 9:30 p.m. and she had helped fasten it on her. Jose's family was taken aback to find that the jacket was still at their home, suggesting that Rocio must have returned to Jose's house in different clothing that day. Jose insisted on his original account. When Rocio went her home, he fell asleep and he didn't know anything else. The location where the evidence was discovered was very close to Jose's house. If the girl had been screaming, as the taxi driver stated, Jose should have heard her since he lived on the lower floor. He claimed he didn't hear anything, and neither did his family. There was no way to verify his alibi as he claimed to have been sleeping at home. Only his parents and a few relatives could confirm that. It was also odd that he didn't offer to take his girlfriend home at such a late hour, even though they could have gone to the fair together. No suspicious calls were found on his phone, leading the investigators to halt further questioning. He appeared in various media outlets to talk about Rocio, expressing hope for her return and participating in the search efforts. The search for Rocio included all nearby areas, with the central zone being where the evidence was found. Alicia suspected that the attack might have occurred there, and there were concerns that Rocio could be seriously injured or even dead. They searched within a 75-kilometer radius of the location where the evidence was discovered. Alicia appeared on television, pleading for assistance in finding her daughter. In her desperation, Alicia consulted several mediums, all of whom claimed that her daughter was still alive. The search continued tirelessly until November 2, 1999. Unfortunately, that day ended in tragedy when police and family members discovered Rocio. She was found deceased near Los Altos del Rodeo Sports Club. The property included a lot with a tennis court, where Rocio's body was located. She was found under a tree by the owners of the court. Rocio was naked and had sustained stab wounds, burns, and significant damage to her body from lying beneath the tree for an extended period. The level of decomposition was so advanced that her identity could not be determined through physical features, and she was ultimately recognized by the jewelry she had been wearing that day. The autopsy determined that Rocio died on the same day she went missing. She had 9 stab wounds in various areas of her body, with marks from the weapon on her bones. Her throat had also been cut. 2 tied garbage bags were found near her body, suggesting that she had been transported to the location by car. These bags likely served to prevent blood from staining the trunk. The investigators believed that the perpetrator did not leave her there on the day of her disappearance, but rather several days later. Investigators discovered a badge next to the body. However, the badge had no name on it and therefore provided no useful information. The autopsy revealed that all 9 stab wounds were made with the same weapon, likely a pocket knife. 8 of these wounds were clustered on her back, indicating that she might have been unconscious or already dead when they were inflicted. The remaining wound on her front, like the 8 on her back, affected vital organs and contributed to her death. Additionally, pink fabric fibers were found at the scene. Besides, another bag was discovered at the crime scene containing her clothing. This bag held a hair that did not belong to Rocio, as it was dark, while she had blonde hair. Although this bag, along with the badge and fabric fibers found on the body, could have aided investigators, they were not useful at that time. The hair was rootless, and the technology then available could not analyze DNA without a root. The fabric fibers, identified as clothing fibers, could not be analyzed either. They needed to be compared with the suspect's clothing, and the samples would have to match exactly for the evidence to be significant. The only helpful item for the police was the clothing found in the bag, including a well-known white t-shirt. This t-shirt had traces that supported the theory that Rocio died from stab wounds and confirmed the number of wounds inflicted. A few weeks prior, 4 police officers noticed a car with multiple passengers while patrolling the area where Rocio later went missing. When they checking the license plate, they found that the car belonged to Dolores Vasquez. Dolores and Alicia have been in a romantic lesbian relationship for 10 years. Initially, their relationship was happy, and they bought a house where they lived with Alicia's children. However, issues arose as the children grew older. Dolores took on the role of disciplinarian and was much stricter than Alicia preferred. Dolores often criticized and punished the children severely, leading to frequent arguments between the couple. Ultimately, they decided to separate because their relationship had become unhappy. Even after the separation and Alicia moving out of their shared home, Dolores remained a significant figure in her life. Alicia, Rocio's mother, lacked higher education and struggled to find a well-paying job, which led to financial challenges for the family. Meanwhile, Dolores held a high-status job and provided substantial financial support to them. She often expressed her love for Alicia's children as if they were her own, particularly for Rocio, whom she practically raised. Dolores was instrumental in the efforts to find Rocio and also contributed financially to the investigation. As the investigation progressed, the police initially had several suspects, but that number gradually decreased. Almost a year after Rocio's death, in September 2000, the first arrest occurred. Dolores was taken into custody as the sole suspect. Dolores's arrest was initially controversial, as the police had no clear evidence linking her to the crime. Some initial clues led them to suspect that the real culprit might be a man, as suggested by a sketch provided by the only witness, a taxi driver. However, the police focused on Dolores, believing that she was motivated by a recent breakup with Alicia Hornos, Rocio's mother. They suspected that Dolores may have acted out of resentment. There were even rumors that Rocio played a role in the breakup, as her relationship with Dolores was said to be strained. These assumptions became the justification for Dolores's arrest. After the detention, one of Spain's most publicized and controversial trials began. Dolores was interrogated for several hours, but consistently maintained her innocence. Earlier, evidence suggesting her involvement had emerged. Pink fabric fibers found on Rocio's body were compared to Dolores's athletic clothing. Laboratory analysis indicated a near-perfect match, confirming that the fibers came from Dolores's clothing. This initial analysis was conducted by a toxicological laboratory, and the police announced the findings at a press conference, leading to a shift in public opinion against Dolores. However, at her attorney's request, a second analysis was conducted at a forensic laboratory. This time, the result was negative. Dolores's defense argued that the initial laboratory might have made an error. The case received widespread media coverage, and everyone had something to say about the actual findings of the police or Dolores's family life. Discussions arose suggesting that Dolores harbored deep-seated resentment towards Rocio. The trial commenced in 2001, and multiple testimonies revealed a very strained relationship between Dolores and Rocio. Alicia testified that Dolores often punished Rocio harshly, restricted her from leaving the house for many years, and frequently yelled at her. As a result, Rocio struggled academically, leading to further reprimands from Dolores, intensifying their conflicts. Alicia recalled a specific moment when Rocio expressed her fears, saying, "Mom, one day she is going to kill me, and you will do nothing." Rosa also shared her experiences of humiliation at the hands of Dolores. Initially, this behavior stemmed from Dolores's education. Unlike Alicia, who could read and write but had no formal qualifications, Dolores's education set her apart. Dolores often introduced Alicia as her sister to friends and acquaintances, rarely acknowledging her as a partner to anyone outside their close circle. This led Alicia to feel that Dolores no longer loved her or her family. A few months prior to the incident, Dolores had threatened Alicia because she refused to rekindle their relationship. Alicia was already with someone else. Alicia told Dolores that their romantic involvement was over, but Alicia was open to being friends and would offer help if needed. In response, she ominously warned Alicia, "You will cry bloody tears. You will be in pain." However, there was no evidence to show that Dolores was physically at the crime scene or had approached Rocio's body. The available evidence may suggest the guilt of someone else, rather than that of Dolores. Despite this, she was labeled guilty based on the evidence presented in court. The police suspected that Rocio knew her attacker. They believed this individual had given her a cloth to use on her wound after inflicting the first injury to the front of her body. However, when Rocio attempted to escape, the attacker, in a fit of rage, inflicted additional wounds to her back. The numerous wounds indicated a level of hatred and cruelty. One piece of evidence was a badge. Dolores participated in the searches, so she could have had access to these badges. Additionally, the testimonies of Dolores's employees came into play, indicating that Dolores was anxious and irritable on the days surrounding Rocio's disappearance. One employee reported that on the day Rocio's body was found, Dolores took a picture of her and began stabbing it with a knife, ultimately destroying the photo. Dolores claimed this was because the employee's Spanish was poor and she wanted to explain what had happened to Rocio. Meanwhile, the police have not released information about how Rocio was killed. An employee reported that on the day of the incident, Dolores shouted about a problem. Another piece of evidence against Dolores is that she usually took daily walks with a friend from Ukraine between 9 and 10 o'clock in the evening. However, on the day Rocio disappeared, Dolores did not meet with her friend and canceled their plans. Additionally, it was discovered that Dolores's phone was tapped, revealing a conversation in which she stated, "They have nothing." The police questioned her friends and family, prompting many to contact Dolores to check on her and ask what to say to the authorities. It became clear to the police that Dolores was confident she would not be caught, believing they had no evidence against her. However, Dolores's defense countered each point made by the prosecution. They presented a record of Dolores's phone calls from that day, both of which were lengthy. If she made her first call at 22:34 and the taxi driver heard Rocio scream around 10 p.m., it would have been impossible for Dolores to arrive, commit the murder, dispose of the body, and then make those calls in such a short time frame. Furthermore, when Dolores called her friends and family, none reported that she seemed nervous or acted unusually. Everything appeared normal. As a result, some evidence was dismissed. The defense also aimed to disprove the significance of a tire track found at the scene. The track belonged to an old car, while Dolores drove a newer Toyota with different tires. The prosecution suggested that Dolores could have rented a car, but this was deemed unlikely. Where could she have rented a car at 10 or 11 p.m.? Rental services would have logged such an unusual request, yet the prosecution had no proof that Dolores rented a vehicle. There was also a theory that she borrowed a car from a neighbor who left their keys in the car, but this idea was considered too far-fetched to be taken seriously. The DNA found on the cigarette butt belonged to a man. The taxi driver testified that he saw a man near the garbage bags containing Rocio's body. Fingerprints on the bags did not match those of Dolores, meaning there was no evidence to prove she was at the crime scene. The only accusation against her was a possible desire for revenge. Additionally, Dolores was known to be psychologically unstable, unfriendly, and often in a bad mood. This was a jury trial. The verdict was delivered not by the judge, but by the jury. The jury was composed of 9 members who deliberated for several hours. The decision was not unanimous, reflecting 7 votes in favor and 2 against. A few months into the trial, Dolores was found guilty of intentionally murdering Rocio Waninkoff and was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Here's what the police believe happened on October 9, 1999. Around 9:30 p.m., Rocio left her boyfriend's house to go home, intending to take a shower and change. While walking home, she encountered Dolores. They began to argue and the situation escalated. Dolores pulled out a knife and stabbed Rocio in the front. After injuring Rocio, Dolores nervously handed her a handkerchief to stop the bleeding. Fearing that Rocio would report her to the police, Dolores chased after her when she tried to flee. Rocio, weakened by her injuries, fell, and Dolores then stabbed her 8 more times. After confirming that Rocio was dead, Dolores placed her body in her car. To keep the interior clean, she wrapped the body in 2 plastic bags. For several days, she concealed the body while participating in the search for Rocio and giving interviews. Eventually, she moved the body to the location where it was later discovered. Dolores initially served her prison sentence, but in 2002, an appeal was filed on her behalf. The appeal was successful, leading to a new trial being scheduled. While Dolores awaited her second trial, both the defense and prosecution prepared to present new evidence. However, an unexpected event caused the trial to be postponed. In August 2003, a 17-year-old girl named Sonia Carabantes went missing from her village after the holidays. Sonia and her family had moved to Malaga after living in Switzerland for a while. As days passed without any news about Sonia, the police worked diligently to locate her. This situation reminded many people of the case of Rocio, as both girls were of similar ages and had similar builds. Tragically, Sonia's fate mirrored that of Rocio. On August 19, 2003, Sonia's body was discovered. She had been strangled and had multiple stab wounds. 2 days after the body was found, on August 21, an autopsy was conducted. During the examination, genetic material was discovered under the victim's nails. This material was identified as skin, indicating that the girl had struggled with her attacker. This evidence could help the police identify the murderer. A DNA sample was taken, analyzed, and entered into the database. The DNA under Sonia's nails matched 100% with DNA found on cigarette butts, linked to Dolores Vasquez from a few years prior. This was puzzling because the person suspected of killing Sonia was already in prison. This means that it is clear that someone else killed both girls. This information was beneficial for Dolores's defense, essentially clearing her of all charges. As a result, there was an increasing belief that Dolores was innocent. One woman stated that her ex-husband, Tony Alexander King, had been acting suspiciously around the time of Rocio's disappearance. She mentioned that he had scratches on his hands were swollen, and he brought home bloody clothes, claiming he had been injured in an accident. On the day Sonia disappeared, Tony visited her in a state of agitation, sweating, and with scratches on his body. When she asked him what had happened, he told her he had gotten into a fight outside a bar, but she found his explanation unconvincing. Tony was a British man living in Spain, near where the crimes took place. At the time, he was going through a divorce and had a child. The type of cigarettes found at the crime scene was Tony's favorite brand, which is rare in Spain. Tony was arrested on September 19, 2003. During the investigation, his DNA was collected, and the results confirmed a match with a cigarette butt and a sample found under Sonia's nails. After his arrest, details about his troubled past surfaced. Tony Alexander King, originally named Anthony Bromwich, was born in 1967. In 1986, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison for attacking several women. Additionally, he had been previously arrested for armed robbery. He served only half of his sentence before being released early for good behavior. Following his release, he changed his name and moved to Spain to start anew. In Spain, he met a woman named Cecilia Matilde Pantoja, and they had a daughter together, also named Sabrina. The Rocio family suspected that even if Dolores didn't commit the crime herself, she was somehow involved. They attended the court hearings for Tony. In 2005, Tony Alexander King was sentenced to 36 years in prison for the death of Sonia Carabantes, and an additional 7 years for an unrelated abuse assault he committed. The trial of Tony Alexander King in connection with the murder of Rocio Waninkoff, which took place in 2006. Initially, Tony claimed he had burned Rocio's body, which contradicted the official account. Although Rocio's body showed signs of burns and fire damage, it was not completely incinerated as Tony had stated. However, during the trial, Tony changed his story completely. He accused 2 individuals, Robert and Dolores, of being involved in the crime. He mentioned that he did not know Dolores well, but that they had a mutual friend, Robert. Tony explained that on October 9, 1999, he went to Robert's house to drink and do banned substance. After a while, he started feeling sick, and then Dolores arrived with another man. He alleged that Robert hypnotized him, and the next thing he remembered was sitting in a car with Robert and Dolores. Tony claimed that in the shadows of the car, Dolores attacked Rocio from behind. He said they placed Rocio in the trunk without realizing Rocio was still alive. Later, Robert got out of the car to check on Rocio. They then wrapped the body in bags to prevent any stains in the car. Tony insisted that he had minimal involvement and portrayed himself as merely a witness to a terrible crime. He is claiming that he left a cigarette butt at the scene. In the second trial, the defense pointed out that the car found at the crime scene was not Tony's car. There was an emerging belief that Tony was not acting alone. When asked why he had not mentioned this during his police arrest, he stated that Dolores had threatened to kill his daughter if he spoke up. On December 14, 2006, the trial ended, and the jury took 13 hours to deliberate. Tony King was convicted of the intentional murder of Rocio, while all charges against Robert were dismissed. Tony was sentenced to 19 years in prison and ordered to pay two compensations, €200,000 to Rocio's mother and €42,000 to her brother and sister. Dolores was released due to the lack of evidence to convict her for her involvement in Rocio's murder. This was a new version of the crime. One night, Tony approached a girl walking home and began to assault and intimidate her. He grabbed her by the neck and pushed her to the location where the evidence was later found. The girl fought back, and he stabbed her in the chest. During the struggle, Rocio managed to unmask him and attempted to flee, but he realized he had gone too far. None of his previous victims had escaped or sustained such severe injuries. After Rocio collapsed, he repeatedly stabbed her in the back until she was no longer breathing. He left her body there for several hours before returning in a car. It is believed that he had the accomplice who helped him load the body into the vehicle. For several days he kept the body with him before disposing of it where it was ultimately found. After the trial, Dolores moved to London and was granted compensation for the months she spent in prison. Many believe that the case cannot be considered closed, as there are still people who assisted Tony. Some think that those individuals could have included Dolores. The families of Rocio and Sonia suffered the loss of daughters who can never return. This case is quite complex, with many developments, particularly in Rocio's case. It remains uncertain whether a single DNA sample found on a cigarette butt was sufficient to place all the blame on Tony. Meanwhile, the Rocio family believes that Dolores played a role in the crime, even if she did not directly kill Rocio. The first test suggested that fibers from Dolores's clothing were found, but a subsequent test contradicted that finding. There is no concrete evidence against her. Unfortunately, without solid evidence, we can only theorize. The seductive predators with their handsome looks and the promise of a sweet future are the devil incarnate. They make their prey willingly walk into their trap, believing they have found love. Just weeks after the secret wedding in Las Vegas, Cynthia was brutally murdered. Her body was found in the desert, her throat cut so deep that it was almost severed. What unfolded next was not just a story of murder, but a tragedy of gullibility, greed, and the dark side of sweet promises. On December 24, 1988, an Arizona police station received a report from Pinal County, near the Superstition Mountains. Witnesses had discovered the body of a young woman showing clear signs of violence. She was dressed casually, with no purse or identification, making immediate identification impossible. There was a deep wound on her leg. Her clothing was soaked in blood, and her neck was brutally slashed, covered in multiple stab wounds. The autopsy revealed that the woman's injuries were even more horrific than they first appeared. Several deep stab wounds had pierced her neck, severing her spine, nearly decapitating her. 4 additional stab wounds had broken 2 ribs and penetrated her heart. The most chilling detail was a faint pattern of bruises on her left temple and eyebrow. The forensic pathologist suspected these marks were made by the sole of a shoe. Matching impressions were later found at the crime scene, suggesting that the killer had pressed his foot against her head to pin her down while inflicting the fatal wounds. Beyond these devastating injuries, the woman's body bore evidence of a prolonged struggle. Bruises on her face and torso, abrasions on her knees, and defensive wounds on her hands. It was clear the murder had been intentional and vicious. Detectives initially assumed the perpetrator was someone the victim knew, But with her identity still unknown, the investigation stalled. However, that same day, the situation changed when the county police department received a call from Kathy Monkman, who reported that her older sister had gone missing the day before. The missing woman's name was Cynthia Estelle Monkman, also known as Cindy. Kathy explained that her sister had failed to show up for a Christmas party planned for December 23rd, something entirely out of character. Since Cynthia had helped organize the event, she hadn't called or sent any message to explain her absence, and all attempts to reach her had gone unanswered. Kathy initially hesitated to contact police, assuming her sister might have changed her plans. But the next morning, the two were scheduled to fly home together to Illinois for the holidays. Kathy left a note and a 7:30 a.m. flight ticket, still hoping Cynthia would appear. When the plane took off and the seat beside her remained empty, Kathy felt a wave of dread. Something was terribly wrong. Kathy provided police with her sister's description, which matched the unidentified woman found in the desert. The timeline also aligned perfectly. Cynthia had gone missing just one day before the body's discovery. Investigators soon learned that shortly before her death, Cynthia had married a man she'd met only a few months earlier. After comparing available evidence, authorities concluded that the body was that of Cynthia Estelle Monkman, 30, a fact later confirmed through dental records and positively identified by her sister. Cynthia was born on September 16, 1958, in Pensacola, Florida. She and Kathy, born just 2 years apart, were inseparable from childhood. Their father, John Alexander Jack Monkman, was a psychologist, while their mother, Dorothy June Monkman, became a full-time homemaker after the children were born. A third child, Isasson, arrived 2 years later. When Jack accepted a new position, the family moved to Champaign, Illinois, where they built a quiet, happy life. Until tragedy struck. Dorothy was diagnosed with breast cancer. She died 2 years later, leaving Jack a widower with 3 young children, aged 6, 4, and 2. It was a crushing loss. But with the help of relatives, he managed to raise his children with love and stability. As they grew up, Cynthia and Kathy remained remarkably close. They attended college together, shared friends, and often took spontaneous road trips across the country to visit old acquaintances. In 1982, Kathy moved to Arizona to attend nursing school. She earned a master's degree in public health and built a promising career as a nutritionist. By 1983, at just 25, she was offered a leadership position at a major health center in Minnesota, a major step forward professionally. However, life far from her sister and family soon left her feeling isolated. By 1986, Cynthia decided to move back to Arizona, settling into an apartment not far from Kathy's home. Cynthia was a vibrant and attractive woman, always the center of attention wherever she went. She had many admirers, drawn to her charisma, confidence. Within the first month of moving back to Arizona, she met Mark, a local radio DJ and small-town celebrity. They quickly began dating. Their relationship was lively and passionate. They shared adventures, parties, but it was also tumultuous. Mark wanted to keep his carefree, party-fueled lifestyle, while Cynthia was ready to settle down, think seriously about starting a family. By July, 29-year-old Cynthia realized that their goals no longer aligned. She suggested they break up. The separation hit her hard. She struggled to cope with the emotional void that followed. To lift her spirits, she and her sister Kathy took a short beach trip to California. Despite their breakup, Cynthia and Mark still had lingering feelings for each other. Then, on the night of October 8, 1988, everything changed. At a lively local nightclub, Cynthia met 2 brothers, Michael Apelt and Rudy Apelt. Tall, handsome newcomers from Germany. Cynthia felt an immediate connection with Michael. Kathy quickly noticed that Cynthia was completely smitten. Michael, 5 years younger than Cynthia and the youngest of 7 siblings, spoke broken English, which made communication clumsy at first. Yet Cynthia insisted that they understood each other without words. Cynthia couldn't stop talking about him. Over breakfast, she told Kathy that Michael had already mentioned marriage. More than once. Kathy was skeptical, thinking it was too soon and possibly just infatuation. But Cynthia brushed off her sister's concern, saying it was just what she needed to forget about her failed relationship with Mark. Their mutual friend, Annette Clay, who had been with them that night, began seeing Rudy, and the two couples soon became inseparable, going on double dates, spending nearly every day together. Within a week, everything accelerated. Rudy moved in with Annette, and Michael moved in with Cynthia. The pace stunned Kathy, who worried that her sister's impulsive decisions would lead to trouble. The whirlwind romance continued through the fall. On December 17, Cynthia and Michael attended a friend's wedding together. Kathy noticed a gold band on her sister's finger and asked about it. To her shock, Cynthia admitted she had already married Michael. On October 28, just 3 weeks after they'd met, it was the first time Cynthia had ever kept such a secret from her sister. Now, only 2 months later, detectives were staring at her lifeless body. They analyzed the limited evidence collected at the desert crime scene: deer tracks, a length of nylon cord, and a blood-soaked beach towel. It was obvious that Cynthia had been deliberately driven to that isolated location to be killed and left behind. The murderer likely assumed the desert would hide the crime forever. But fate intervened when her body was discovered by chance. After learning the details of Cynthia's recent life, detectives focused on 2 possible suspects: her new husband, Michael, or her ex-boyfriend, Mark. The savagery of the attack suggested a deeply personal motive: rage, jealousy, or betrayal. Investigators soon uncovered more unsettling information. A few weeks before her death, one of Mark's former girlfriends had been found dead under suspicious circumstances. That case was still under review by the state's Supreme Court. Cynthia and Mark had spoken just 3 days before her murder. During the call, an argument broke out when Cynthia revealed she had married someone else. Although she managed to calm him down, Mark reportedly told her he would be in town for Christmas and wanted to meet her. When Cynthia failed to show up at the pre-Christmas party and didn't answer any calls, her loved ones grew worried. The next morning, Michael phoned Kathy, shouting frantically into the receiver, demanding to know where his wife was. He sounded intoxicated. Kathy, alarmed by his tone, tried to piece together what had happened, when he had last seen Cynthia, and whether she might have met Mark after all. For a brief moment, Kathy even wondered if her sister had run away with her ex. Kathy went to Cynthia's apartment, hoping to find some clue about her sister's disappearance. But there was nothing. No signs of a struggle. No message. No hint of where she had gone. Cynthia's photo was now everywhere. On TV, in newspapers, plastered across Arizona. Her family was devastated. Then, just days later, they received a letter that Cynthia had mailed before her death. The timing made it chilling to read. In the letter, she wrote warmly about her new marriage and expressed a wish for everyone to meet and get to know each other better. She seemed hopeful, unaware of the tragedy to come. Because of the language barrier, her relatives had never really been able to communicate properly with Michael. That same day, as Cynthia's family learned the awful news, a detective fluent in German was sent to speak with Michael. Though relatively inexperienced with murder investigations, he was chosen because of his language skills. The decision proved useful. Michael opened up quickly, relieved to finally speak with someone he could fully understand. The detective focused on reconstructing the couple's final hours on December 23, 1928. The day everything went wrong. Michael appeared tense from the start, but he managed to recount his version of events. He claimed that earlier that day, he and Cynthia had taken her car to a dealership for maintenance and rented another vehicle to get home. According to him, Cynthia spent the afternoon preparing for a trip, and told him she planned to meet some friends around 10 o'clock p.m. Michael said that around 7 o'clock p.m., while he was showering, he overheard Cynthia having a heated phone conversation. Her voice sounded emotional, angry, even, but he couldn't understand the words or identify who she was speaking to. Moments later, she shouted something about needing to take care of an issue, grabbed her purse and luggage, and left without explanation. By the time Michael got out of the shower, she was gone. He cooperated fully with detectives, allowing them to search the apartment and car. He even presented a restaurant receipt from that same evening, December 23, as proof of his whereabouts. When police checked the couple's answering machine, one message stood out. At 10 o'clock a.m., Mark had called, saying he'd seen a news report about a missing woman who looked like Cynthia. He sounded alarmed and asked for someone to call back. But detectives found his timing suspicious. News of Cynthia's disappearance had barely begun circulating, making it unlikely he could have seen the story so early. To investigators, it almost sounded like he was trying to get ahead of the story and distance himself from suspicion. Ironically, because of his limited English, Michael didn't even realize yet that his wife was dead. When police brought him, Rudy, and Annette in for questioning, all three appeared distraught. Michael broke down in tears, screaming and demanding to know what had happened to Cynthia. But soon after, the group was separated for individual interrogations. Investigators collected shoe prints, hair, and blood samples from each of them, while also verifying their alibis. Everything checked out. They were released shortly after. For now, suspicion shifted back to Mark, whose behavior was beginning to seem erratic. The lead investigator flew to California to interview Mark in person. Meanwhile, Cynthia's phone continued to receive multiple calls, each one from Mark, leaving message after message on her answering machine, as if he were desperately trying to reach her. But when the detective reviewed his movements, Mark's alibi held up. He had worked his full shift at the radio station that day, then rented a car and driven to Los Angeles to spend Christmas with his mother and sister. It was confirmed he couldn't have been in Arizona when Cynthia was killed. Cynthia's funeral was held on December 31, 1988. When Michael was invited to speak, he stepped to the podium, but couldn't say a single word. He broke down completely, sobbing uncontrollably, until Rudy led him away. The mourners took this as a sign of deep grief. But afterward, as everyone drove away from the cemetery, Kathy happened to pass the brothers' car. To her shock, she saw Michael and Rudy laughing and joking with Annette. The sight froze her. Just hours earlier, Michael had collapsed in tears over his wife's coffin. Now he was smiling as if nothing had happened. In that moment, Kathy's instincts told her something was terribly wrong. Michael's grief, she realized, might have been nothing more than an act. Kathy shared her growing doubts about Michael with the detectives. Her words made them pause. Something in the case didn't fit together neatly, and now law enforcement decided to re-interview everyone involved. The first person they called in was Kathy herself. This time, she provided a fuller account of the whirlwind romance that had unfolded before the murder. To the investigators, the German brothers, Michael and Rudy, now appeared increasingly suspicious. They were evasive about nearly everything: their work, their finances, even their pasts. Whenever asked for details, they dodged the questions or changed the subject. Kathy recalled that only a few days after meeting them, she spotted the brothers entering one of the cheapest motels in town. This was odd, considering they had boasted about staying at a luxurious resort and working in high-level banking. That same night, she realized $100 was missing from her purse. At the time, she convinced herself it must have been a coincidence. But now, she wasn't so sure. The brothers' appearance had always been flashy, designed to project the image of wealth. But beneath the surface, their stories were full of cracks. Within weeks, they spun a new tale. They had supposedly been fired from the bank and were waiting for their next big opportunity. In the meantime, They guilted the women into letting them stay in their apartments. Kathy could see how easily her sister had been drawn into their charm, though she now recognized how manipulative it all seemed in hindsight. Another strange detail was Cynthia's sudden, secret marriage. Just a week after moving in, Michael told her he was facing deportation and could only stay in the U.S. if they married immediately. Under pressure and blinded by affection, Cynthia agreed. The two were secretly married in Las Vegas on October 28, only 3 weeks after meeting. The rushed wedding now painted a far darker picture, one of coercion and exploitation rather than love. Detectives began digging into the brothers' background. They soon discovered that Cynthia was far from the first woman to fall for their act. Since arriving from Germany, the brothers had courted several women and proposed to more than one. What had seemed like a whirlwind romance between Cynthia and Michael now appeared to be part of a troubling pattern. When police found Cynthia's diary, the last entry, dated November 11, read like a woman trying to convince herself that her husband truly loved her. It was painfully clear she had doubts. Despite this, not direct evidence yet tied Michael, Rudy, or anyone else from Cynthia's circle to the murder. Detectives examined a car rented on the day of her death, but its tire tread didn't match the prints found in the desert. Forensic tests on the brothers' own car also came up empty. Then, on January 3, Michael unexpectedly reached out to the German-speaking detective. He claimed that after returning home from Cynthia's funeral, he had found a strange message on his answering machine. It sounded like a threat, but he couldn't fully understand it. He asked the detective to translate. The next day, January 4, Michael came to the station with the recording. The message was chilling. The caller threatened to kill Michael and his loved ones if certain unspecified items weren't delivered. The voice even claimed responsibility for slashing Cynthia's throat. But something about it immediately struck detectives as odd. The voice sounded unnatural, as if the person were reading from a script. The phrasing was awkward, the pronunciation off, when translated literally into German. However, the message suddenly made perfect sense, almost as if it had originally been written in German and then clumsily translated into English. The officers pretended to take the message seriously, but in reality, it only deepened their suspicions. The list of likely culprits was narrowing fast. Michael, Rudy, and Annette were now squarely in their sights. Police placed the group under 24-hour surveillance. On the evening of January 5, officers stationed near their apartment observed movement inside around 5:30 p.m. Then, at 8:30 p.m., an undercover agent knocked on their door, pretending to have the wrong address. His true goal was simply to confirm who was inside. Moments later, after the visit, Michael called the police in a panic. He claimed that 2 black men had come to his door and threatened him. It was an obvious fabrication, but the officers played along. Instead of confronting him, they invited him and his companions to the station the next day to help create composite sketches of these supposedly threatening men. Michael was interrogated for several hours while the rest of his group interrogated in separate rooms. The detectives deliberately dragged out the interrogation, cleverly introducing details about Cynthia's case and carefully watching for cracks in their composure, waiting for the first sign that someone's resolve was about to break. It was Annette who gave in first. Though she resisted confessing for a long time, her confidence began to crumble when one of the detectives placed crime scene photos of Cynthia's mutilated body in front of her. Under mounting pressure, detectives threatened Annette with murder charges if she continued to hide the truth. Cornered, she finally confessed. Annette said both Michael and Rudy were seeking permanent residency in the United States. Since they spoke little English, Annette had served as their translator and intermediary. Together, they had invented several identities, claiming at times to be surfboard manufacturers, and at others, importers of luxury German cars. That was how they had first presented themselves when they met Cynthia. In reality, the brothers had been living for months in a cheap Arizona motel, surviving off the money and generosity of women They seduced. They used their looks and voices to manipulate and extort money from those who have fallen for them. Annette did not admit to knowing about the murder plot, nor did she say it had been premeditated. But her statements revealed that her friendship with Cynthia had been based solely on financial gain. After moving in with Cynthia and marrying her, Michael continued to spend recklessly while Cynthia worked 2 jobs to support them both. He told her their bank accounts in Germany were temporarily frozen, promising that once the funds were released, they would live comfortably. Between October and December, Michael drained more than $4,000 from her savings. Then Michael started to get interested in an easy, luxurious life and wanted more. It was then that he devised a plan for fast money. On November 7, 1988, Michael convinced his wife to contact an insurance agent so they could take out matching life insurance policies for $1 million each. Naturally, Michael was listed as the primary beneficiary of Cynthia's policy. He continued to feed her lies about his frozen assets, claiming that the life insurance was simply a smart precaution until their fortune in Germany became available. Cynthia, deeply in love and trusting, agreed without hesitation. The agent approved the policies, but the amount was reduced to $400,000. Cynthia immediately wrote the check, unaware she was signing her own death warrant. From that moment, Michael and Rudy began planning how they would spend the payout. They even drew up a purchase and sale agreement for 2 Jaguar cars, worth $144,000 each, and 2 Toyota cars, each worth $66,000. They were also looking for expensive items, fully aware that in order to obtain all this luxury, they would have to kill. The policy officially went into effect 1 day before Cynthia's death, and the coverage amount was later increased to $800,000. By then, the brothers had already rented a car, the same one they would use to lure Cynthia to the desert and kill her. According to Annette's statement, on the day of the murder, Michael and Rudy drove Cynthia out to the desert under the pretense of a short trip. Once there, they coaxed her out of the car and attacked her. Annette remained inside the vehicle, too terrified to intervene. The assault lasted roughly 5 minutes. When the brothers returned, they were covered in blood from head to toe. Calmly, they changed clothes, washed off the blood to avoid staining the rental car, and disposed of all evidence. That night, they went to a luxury restaurant to celebrate what they believed was a perfect crime, a murder that would soon make them rich. But their plan quickly began to unravel. Cynthia's body was discovered within hours, and the brothers' illusion of control crumbled almost instantly. Detectives soon began digging deeper into their background. Through cooperation with German authorities, they learned that Michael had no bank accounts, Neustadt, and no business ventures in Germany. His life there had been far from glamorous. He was a manual laborer with a criminal record for burglary and assault. His brother, Rudy, had also served time in prison for physical abuse. Given their criminal histories, police investigated possible links to other crimes in the United States, but none were found. It appeared that Cynthia was their first and only murder victim, yet one question still puzzled investigators. Why didn't the tire tracks at the crime scene match the rental car the brothers had used? The answer came later. Michael had anticipated that very issue. On the night of the murder, he deliberately drove in a way that damaged the tire tread. When they returned the car, the rental company had to replace all 4 tires, effectively erasing one of the most crucial pieces of physical evidence. The owner of the rental car helped police confirm the truth of the story. After Cynthia's funeral, to create the illusion of outside threats, Michael and Rudy had hired a random homeless man from the streets of Los Angeles. They paid him to call a specific phone number and read a scripted message filled with menacing words. Annette was granted immunity from prosecution in exchange for testifying against Michael and Rudy, an offer she quickly accepted. During a detailed search of the apartment shared by Michael and Cynthia, investigators discovered a pair of shoes whose soles matched the footprints found at the crime scene, confirming the brothers' involvement. Later, during the suspect's imprisonment, Several handwritten notes containing incriminating information were also uncovered and used as evidence against them. During the trial, Michael made the reckless decision to testify in his own defense. Despite his lawyer's efforts to dissuade him, he insisted on speaking, believing himself more intelligent than everyone else. That arrogance became his downfall, as his statements were full of contradictions that only strengthened the jury's certainty of his guilt. Michael and Rudy desperately tried to shift the blame onto Annette, but their attempt failed. On August 10, 1990, the jury found Michael Apelt and Rudy Alfred Apelt guilty of first-degree murder, sentencing both brothers to death. However, in 2009, Rudy's death sentence was overturned after an IQ test determined that he was mentally disabled. Under federal law, people with mental disorders could not be sentenced to death. As they often didn't understand the gravity of their actions, Rudy's sentence was commuted to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Michael's sentence, however, has remained unchanged, his legal team deliberately delaying appeals to postpone execution. Michael remains on death row to this day. The Supreme Court actually upheld his death sentence in 2019, on April 26, 2022. At the age of 62, Rudy Apelt died in prison at the Abrazo West campus. Cynthia's death left an unhealing wound on her family. The loss was so devastating that her sister Kathy struggled to trust men, or people in general, for decades, not marrying until she was 50. The murder of Cynthia Monkman was not a crime of passion but a calculated act of greed, committed by sociopaths who saw human life as nothing more than a tool to achieve material gain. Ironically, insurance companies, in their relentless pursuit of profit through high-value policies, had unknowingly given the killers a motive. In a city where nothing ever truly stops, there are moments when everything goes quiet, so quiet that no one realizes something is wrong until it's already too late. Some stories don't begin with violence. They begin with a decision, one that seems small, necessary, even harmless at the time. For Catherine Woods, that decision was leaving everything behind. At just 17, she walked away from Ohio with a single goal: to make it to Broadway. She had the discipline, the talent, and the determination to get there. And for a while, it looked like everything was going exactly as planned. But New York has a way of demanding more than ambition. And slowly, almost invisibly, Catherine began building a life no one else could fully see. A life that would eventually lead her somewhere she never intended to go. Because by November 27, 2005, that quiet, carefully constructed world was about to collapse. The story starts not with violence, but with Catherine Woods leaving Ohio. At 17, Catherine, a dedicated dancer, left her home state. Years of training had shaped her, and she was determined to reach Broadway. Fame wasn't her goal, but the chance to use her talent and hard work on a real stage was. New York City held that opportunity. Her parents supported her move, both proud and worried. Those close to the family said they understood how demanding the city could be. Catherine quickly learned to be independent, but also faced new risks. Still, she felt prepared. Initially, she stayed on track. Her days were packed with classes and auditions, moving, practicing, getting rejected, and trying again. Friends remembered her focus, seeing progress in every small step. She was determined, not reckless. But determination alone couldn't pay the bills. Living in Manhattan was expensive, and the costs piled up. Training and simply surviving both required money. Like many young performers, she took on multiple jobs. Eventually, she made a secret decision. She began working as an exotic dancer, using a stage name to keep it separate from her previous life. This decision changed everything. Emotionally, it created a divide within her. By day, she still pursued her Broadway dream. By night, she worked a different kind of stage, focused on survival. Catherine's personal life became complicated. She lived with her boyfriend, David Hahn, whom she knew from Ohio. However, their relationship was unstable, marked by financial pressures, emotional strain, and frequent arguments. Their future together seemed uncertain. Then Paul Cortez appeared. She met Cortez at her gym. He was well-educated, calm, and appeared successful, a different kind of man who offered a different kind of future. Their relationship developed discreetly, alongside her existing one with David. She was involved with two men, leading two different lives, creating a precarious situation. To the world, Catherine Woods seemed like a young woman building a life in New York City, but underneath, her life was becoming increasingly strained. In late November 2005, Catherine Woods' life changed forever. She died in her small Upper East Side apartment in Manhattan. The exact details and timeline of her death were unclear at the time. A key question emerged: when someone's life falls apart, what breaks first, and who is there to witness it? By 2005, Catherine was living a double life, neither of which felt complete or secure. During the day, she was the young woman her family knew, dedicated to her dance career and determined to make it on Broadway. She had moved from Ohio to New York to pursue this dream. At night, she transformed. Using a different name, Catherine worked as an exotic dancer in Manhattan. The environment was both controlled and unpredictable, filled with lights, music, and performance, but also close contact with strangers and blurred boundaries. The investigation suggested that this work was a matter of survival, a way to pay rent and support her dreams. Many performers in New York make similar compromises. However, for Catherine, it created a divide between who she was and who she felt she needed to be. She hid this part of her life from her family completely. They believed she was progressing and building a stable future. They were unaware of the growing pressure she faced, the late nights, the exhaustion, and the difficult choices she made between her ambitions and her needs. Meanwhile, her personal life was also under strain. Her relationship with David Hahn, her roommate, was deteriorating. They lacked stability, argued frequently, and struggled with money and trust. Their once strong connection was fading. Despite this, she stayed with him. At the same time, she was developing a new relationship with Paul Cortez, a gym trainer who was intelligent and well-spoken. According to the case file, their relationship began discreetly, with messages and meetings, offering her a sense of escape from her chaotic life. However, secrecy has its burdens. Maintaining two relationships demanded careful planning, timing, and silence. A single mistake could ruin everything. This pressure began to show. Investigators later found communications suggesting emotional strain and potential conflict, although interpretations of these details varied. Two men existed in parallel. Neither was fully aware of the other, at least not at first. This was the fracture point. Catherine was no longer just balancing work and ambition. She was balancing truth itself. What she revealed. What she concealed. What she hoped would never collide. And then, according to the timeline later reconstructed by investigators, the lines began to blur. Conversations changed. Emotions sharpened. The structure she had carefully maintained started to destabilize. No single moment announced it. No clear warning sign. Just a gradual tightening of pressure, quiet, invisible, but constant. Until one night, everything would converge. Because on November 27, 2005, inside that Upper East Side apartment, the separation between her two worlds would disappear completely, and what remained would not be performance, or ambition, or survival. It would be evidence. When two lives collide without warning, what survives? and what is left behind for investigators to piece together. It began with silence. On November 27, 2005, Catherine Woods did not answer her phone. She did not return messages. For someone balancing multiple jobs and relationships, a delay was not unusual. But this time, something felt different. According to the investigation, the silence stretched longer than it should have. Inside her Upper East Side apartment, time had already stopped. The discovery came through David Hahn. He later told investigators that he had been unable to reach her. Concern turned into urgency. When he arrived at the apartment, what he found would immediately shift the case from concern to homicide. Catherine Woods was lying on the floor, unresponsive. The scene was violent, far beyond anything accidental. Factually, the medical examiner would later confirm she had been stabbed multiple times. The injuries were severe, deliberate. There was no indication of forced entry. No immediate sign of a struggle spilling beyond the apartment. Emotionally, the scene carried a different weight. It suggested proximity, familiarity. This was not random. Police arrived quickly. The apartment was secured. The first layer of investigation began, not with answers, but with containment. Officers documented the scene. Blood patterns, position of the body, objects in the room. Every detail mattered now. And one detail stood out immediately. David Hahn was the one who found her. In cases like this, investigators often begin with those closest to the victim. It is not an assumption, it is a procedure. Statistically, proximity matters. Relationships matter. And David was both present and connected. He became the first focus. According to investigative accounts, his behavior, his timeline, and his statements were examined closely. Where had he been? When was the last time he saw Catherine alive? Were there signs of conflict between them? Their strained relationship did not go unnoticed. At the same time, the apartment itself began to speak. Meanwhile, the apartment seemed to tell its own story. There was no evidence of a break-in. This implied Catherine either knew her attacker or the person had a key. Detectives observed that the violence felt personal, deliberate, yet extremely forceful. The type of wound suggested the attack happened up close. The room felt charged with the aftermath of something abrupt, emotional, and final. Who was close to Catherine and angry enough to commit such a crime? As investigators pieced together the timeline, another detail surfaced. Catherine's phone records. Her recent communications. The people she had been in contact with in the hours leading up to her death. At first, these were just data points. Names. Numbers. Timestamps. But hidden within them was a connection that would soon redirect the entire investigation. Because Catherine Woods had not been living a single life. And now, as detectives widened their lens beyond the apartment, they began to realize something critical. There was more than one man in her story. If the first suspect was too obvious, then who else had a reason to be there that night, and why had they not come forward? In the first hours of a homicide investigation, clarity is rare. But direction is not. From the moment Catherine Woods was found, David Hahn stood at the center of that direction. Not because he was proven guilty, but because he was closest. He lived with her. He found her. And according to standard investigative procedure, proximity demands scrutiny. Detectives began with his timeline. Where had he been that night? When had he last seen Catherine alive? His answers, according to the case file, were consistent, but consistency alone is not confirmation. Investigators cross-checked his statements against phone records, witness accounts, and any available surveillance. His alibi had to be solid. Was he simply a witness, or was he involved in something more? His relationship with Catherine became a key area of focus. Friends and acquaintances described tension between them. Arguments, financial strain, emotional instability. Nothing uncommon in isolation, but in the context of a violent death, every fracture matters. Investigators examined whether those tensions could have escalated into something irreversible. At the same time, physical evidence was processed. The apartment showed no signs of forced entry. This detail reinforced an early working theory: Catherine had known her attacker. Someone she trusted enough to let inside. Or someone who already belonged there. That assumption kept David in focus. Forensic teams collected fingerprints, blood samples, and trace evidence from the scene. Each piece would either support or dismantle the initial hypothesis. Detectives waited for lab results while continuing to question those closest to Catherine. But something did not fully align. According to investigative accounts, certain elements of the timeline began to resist a simple explanation. The estimated time of death. The sequence of events. The physical evidence did not immediately point in a single, clear direction. And then there was behavior. David had called for help. He had not fled. He had remained present. These actions do not eliminate suspicion, but they complicate it. Investigators had to consider not just what was possible, but what was consistent with the evidence. Slowly, the focus began to shift, not away from him entirely, but outward. Because Catherine's life, as detectives were beginning to understand, extended beyond that apartment. Beyond that relationship. Beyond what was immediately visible. Her phone records were analyzed more closely. Numbers repeated. Calls are made late at night. Messages were exchanged with someone who had not yet been fully identified within the scope of the investigation. A second presence began to take shape, not in the room, but in the data. This was the first crack in the initial theory. David Hahn remained under scrutiny. His role was not dismissed. But investigators were no longer certain he was the only answer. And in homicide investigations, uncertainty is not a setback, it is a doorway. Because once detectives looked beyond the obvious, they found something else waiting. Another man. Another connection. Another possible truth. If the first suspect did not fully explain the crime, then who was the person hidden in Catherine's final hours, and why had they remained in the background? The shift did not happen all at once. It began quietly, with a number. As investigators expanded their focus beyond David Hahn, Catherine Wood's phone records became a central thread. Calls, messages, time-stamps, each one a fragment of her final days. And within that data, one name appeared with increasing frequency. Paul Cortez. He was not part of Catherine's public life. Not someone her family knew. Not someone immediately visible in her daily routine. But according to the investigation, his presence in her communications was consistent and recent. Detectives started a more thorough investigation. Paul Cortez was a personal trainer, educated, and married. He seemed to live a stable life. His background didn't immediately suggest he was capable of violence. However, cases are built on evidence, not just appearances. His connection to Catherine was becoming increasingly significant. Investigators discovered that they had developed a secret relationship over time. Their messages indicated a strong emotional bond, possibly romantic. While the nature of their relationship would later be debated in court, it was clear they were close and in frequent contact, making him part of Catherine's close circle. He had communicated with her shortly before she died. As the investigation focused on him, a new possibility emerged. Had their hidden relationship turned dangerous? Detectives pieced together the timeline of events. Where was Cortez on the night of November 27th? His initial statements didn't initially seem suspicious. But, like all suspects, his statements needed verification using phone records, location data, and physical evidence. Gradually, inconsistencies began to appear. These inconsistencies weren't enough to prove guilt, but they were enough to cast doubt on his story. Investigators examined the nature of his relationship with Catherine. Was it mutual? Was there tension? Was there conflict that had escalated? These questions did not yet have definitive answers, but they pointed toward motive, the element that transforms presence into possibility. A stark contrast emerged. Catherine had two men in her life. One was known, the other secret. One was already a suspect, the other newly revealed. As the investigation expanded, attention shifted. David Hahn was no longer the only focus. Cortez was now a factor in an increasingly complex puzzle. A crucial breakthrough occurred. Forensic analysis of the apartment began yielding results. Physical evidence collected at the scene was being analyzed. Among the findings was something that promised to ground suspicion in concrete evidence, rather than just speculation. A mark left at the scene. Difficult to dismiss. It wasn't a final conclusion, but it provided a new avenue of inquiry. In homicide investigations, relationships suggest possibilities, but evidence reveals the truth. Paul Cortez was no longer just a name. He was now a person of interest. If a secret relationship placed him with Catherine before her death, what physical evidence proved he was in her apartment, and what transpired there? The case now hinged not on suspicion, but on physical evidence. In Catherine Wood's apartment, investigators gathered crucial silent evidence: blood patterns, undisturbed objects, and a notable bloody handprint. This handprint, distinct enough to preserve and analyze, initially seemed like another piece of forensic material. However, lab analysis transformed it into a potential clue to the identity of the perpetrator. Fingerprint comparisons began. The handprint didn't match Catherine Wood's or David Hahn's prints. This discovery didn't solve the case, but it cast doubt on the initial suspects and suggested a different direction for the investigation. Then, a match was found. Investigators determined that the handprint was consistent with Paul Cortez's. This forensic evidence placed him inside the apartment, significantly shifting the focus of the investigation. If Cortez was present, what transpired in Catherine Wood's final moments? Cortez's status immediately changed. No longer a marginal figure, he was now directly connected to the crime scene. His previous statements, timeline, and proximity to the victim were all reevaluated in light of this new evidence. At the same time, digital evidence began to align. Phone records placed him in communication with Catherine shortly before her death. The timing, according to investigators, was critical. It suggested not just a relationship, but recent contact, possibly leading up to the moment itself. Step by step, the narrative tightened. Investigators considered the sequence: entry, interaction, escalation. The absence of forced entry remained significant. Catherine had likely allowed her attacker inside. The violence suggested something personal, something that had intensified quickly. But the motive remained complex. Was this jealousy? A confrontation? A breakdown in a hidden relationship? According to court proceedings later, these questions would be argued, interpreted, and challenged. Not every detail was universally agreed upon. But the physical evidence, the handprint, did not carry interpretation. It carried presence. And presence is difficult to dispute. Cortez was questioned again. His explanations, according to reports, attempted to account for the evidence. But investigators were no longer working from theory. They were working from the trace. Then came the decisive moment. With forensic results, timeline reconstruction, and communication records aligning, authorities moved forward. Cortez was arrested and charged in connection with Catherine Wood's murder. The case, once uncertain, had found direction. But direction is not resolution. Because in court, evidence is not just presented, it is contested. Every detail is examined, challenged, and reframed. What seems clear in an investigation can become uncertain under scrutiny. And Cortez would not accept the narrative being built around him. If the evidence placed him at the scene, then could it fully explain what happened, or would the courtroom reveal a different version of the truth? The courtroom does not search for truth. It tests it. When Paul Cortez stood trial, the case that investigators had built entered a different environment, one defined not by discovery, but by argument. Every piece of evidence would now be examined from two opposing directions. What the prosecution saw as certainty, the defense would attempt to fracture. At the center of the trial was the physical evidence. The bloody handprint recovered from Catherine Wood's apartment became one of the prosecution's strongest points. Forensic experts testified that it matched Cortez, placing him at the scene during or around the time of a presence that was difficult to explain away. Alongside this, phone records and communication logs established that he had been in contact with Catherine shortly before her death. The prosecution's narrative was direct. They argued that Cortez had gone to Catherine's apartment, that an encounter had escalated, and that the violence that followed was deliberate. The absence of forced entry supported the idea that Catherine had let him in. The number and severity of the wounds suggested intensity, something beyond accident or self-defense. But the defense pushed back. Cortez did not deny knowing Catherine. He did not deny contact. But according to defense arguments, the interpretation of the evidence was incomplete. They questioned how and when the handprint had been left. They raised doubts about the exact sequence of events. They challenged whether the prosecution had proven motive beyond speculation. In criminal trials, doubt is not a weakness. It is a strategy. Witnesses were called. Experts testified. Timelines were reconstructed again, this time under cross-examination. Each side attempted to shape the same set of facts into different conclusions. And at the center of it all was Catherine. Her life, her relationships, her choices, presented not as a story, but as evidence. A young woman whose final moments were now being interpreted in fragments, each one carrying legal significance. Then came the decision. After deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. Paul Cortez was found guilty of second-degree murder. The court concluded that the evidence, particularly the forensic link and the surrounding circumstances, was sufficient to establish his responsibility. He was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. The case, in legal terms, was resolved. But a resolution in court does not always settle every question. Because Cortez maintained his innocence. He would later seek a new trial, arguing that aspects of the case had been mishandled or misunderstood. These claims, while part of the legal process, did not overturn the conviction. Still, they left a shadow. If a verdict closes a case, why do some stories refuse to stay closed, and what remains unresolved beneath the surface of a conviction? The case ended in a courtroom. But the story did not end there. The verdict offered Catherine Wood's family some closure, but not peace. Her life, once full of discipline and dreams, ended tragically and far from home. After the trial, her parents had to piece together not just the circumstances of her death, but also aspects of her life they hadn't known. Catherine had been living a secret life, hidden from even her closest family. Their grief was mixed with the unsettling realization of how much can be concealed, even within a family, and how difficult it is to truly understand someone's life from afar. They preferred to remember her as she was before she moved to New York, a dancer, focused and full of hope. This image of her, untainted by the struggles that marked her final years, became a precious memory, a comforting constant in the face of the complicated truth that emerged after her death. However, the impact of the case lingered. Paul Cortez, convicted and sentenced, did not accept the outcome as final. According to legal filings, he sought a new trial, arguing that aspects of the evidence and proceedings had been flawed or insufficiently examined. These claims did not overturn the conviction, but they kept the case alive in another form, within appeals, within legal argument, within unresolved interpretation. And this is where the certainty begins to soften. Because while the court established responsibility, motive remained less clearly defined. Investigators and prosecutors suggested emotional conflict, possibly tied to the hidden relationship. But not every detail was conclusively established. Some elements, timing, escalation, intent, were reconstructed from evidence, not witnessed directly. This is the nature of many cases. Evidence builds a structure strong enough for conviction. But it does not always answer every question. The apartment on the Upper East Side returned to silence. The physical space where everything ended no longer held investigators, only absence. Yet what happened there continued to exist, in records, in testimony, in memory. And beyond the legal outcome, the case leaves something broader. A reflection on vulnerability. On the hidden pressures of survival in a city that demands more than it gives. On the risks that emerged not from strangers in the dark, but from relationships formed in proximity, trusted, complicated, and sometimes misunderstood. Catherine Woods came to New York to build a future. She adapted. She endured. She navigated choices that many never saw. And in the end, her story became something else, a case studied, argued, and remembered, not just for how it ended, but for how it unfolded. Because beneath every verdict lies a quieter question. When all the evidence has been presented, what parts of the truth remain just out of reach, and who continues to carry them? Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case, the heartbreaking case of a beautiful woman, Julie Scully. Julie Marie Scully, an American woman, gave up everything to pursue love, but just a few months later, her body was found in a horrific state in a remote lake in Turkey. What turned her beautiful life into an international sensation case? Let's follow the case today. Julie was the daughter of Julia and John Scully. To understand her story better, let's consider her parents' situation. Julia was born in 1943 on an Indian reservation in New Mexico, home to the second-largest Native American tribe in the United States. Life on the reservation was extremely challenging, with no electricity or running water and limited job opportunities due to widespread alcoholism. Many residents turned to substance abuse as a coping mechanism. At the age of 12, Julia's parents sent her to a boarding school to help her learn English and adapt to life outside the reservation. After moving to the city, she began to fit in as an average American and found work at a mental health facility. However, she became addicted to substances. Later, Julia met a police officer named John. They got married just 2 days before the one-year anniversary of their meeting. John took a job as a patrolman in one of the most dangerous areas of North Philadelphia. In January 1969, Julia became pregnant, and they welcomed their daughter, Julie. As Julie grew, she formed a very close bond with her father, and relatives noted that she would do anything to earn his approval. Father and daughter spent a lot of time together fishing, while Julia often felt sidelined in family life. During these times, she struggled with feelings of being an outsider. Although Julia hid her substance addiction, her erratic behavior raised concerns among those around her. Things worsened as Julia began to use more potent illegal additives. Despite this, on November 10, 1969, Julie's brother, John Patrick Scully, was born. The new baby quickly became the center of attention for their parents, leaving Julie feeling unloved and neglected. Meanwhile, Julia's substance abuse continued, and she fell into a deep depression. In 1970, 973. Overwhelmed, she took an entire pack of sleeping pills. Fortunately, John found her in time, administered first aid, and called for medical help. Julia was revived, but not only did the family learn of her addiction, the situation deteriorated further. She began to resemble a shell of her former self. Soon after, Julia attempted self-harm again due to depression, but this time, she also was saved. The issues between her parents did not go unnoticed by their children, especially by Julie, who was 9 years old at the time. During her birthday party, friends gathered to celebrate, but in the middle of the festivities, their father left to see his mistress. He had been having an affair for a while, viewing it as an escape from his growing disgust for his dependent wife. He stayed with Julia only for the sake of the children. During the party, the mistress arrived at their home to pick up John, and Julie saw her leaving with him. He seemed completely unconcerned that his secret was now obvious. This revelation hit Julie hard, and Julia began to blame herself for the situation. Julia struggled to understand what was really happening. During this time, Julie had once been an excellent student, started to fall to a C average in school. John then decided to transfer her to a new school in Kensington. In here, Julie, a bright and beautiful girl, became very popular, but also fell in with a bad crowd. She started skipping school, and her grades continued to decline. By this time, she was 12 years old and already looked attractive, attracting the attention of many boys. All this was aggravated by the fact that their family lived in a disadvantaged area, which made her parents increasingly afraid for Julie, fearing she could become a victim of the addiction. One evening, Julie's friends were supposed to spend the night, but when the mother came to check on them, the schoolgirls were not in the room. Concerned, Julia contacted emergency services, and the police eventually located them in downtown Philadelphia. Julie's relationship with her mother was deteriorating, resulting in frequent arguments. Her rebellious behavior also troubled her father. Julia entered treatment for her addiction. During Julia's absence, the home environment became more peaceful. However, despite Julie's early attempts to please her father, her rebellious nature intensified. She continued to skip classes and perform poorly academically due to spending more time with friends. When John learned of this, he was very upset. At the age of 14, Julie informed her father that she wanted to drop out of school. This decision likely stemmed from her feeling ignored by her parents. She was attractive and often the center of attention at parties, making her prioritize fun over her father's approval. By the age of 14, Julie had started living a sexual life. After graduating from high school, her parents began considering her future and special education needs. John helped her gain admission to a prestigious engineering school, known for its strict selection process. He personally spoke to the director to ensure she would be accepted without facing competition, emphasizing that she was the daughter of an indigenous person, which he hoped would earn her some concessions. In the fall of 1983, his efforts succeeded, and Julie enrolled in the engineering program. Meanwhile, her brother chose a different path. He joined the Navy as soon as he turned 16. During this time, Julie decided she was content with her life and dropped out of school to pursue financial independence. She began working and soon met a boyfriend. He was 6 years older than her. Their relationship progressed quickly, and they married in November 1985, just a few months before Julie turned 18. Although marrying provided her with financial support and emotional stability, their union was kept secret, even from her father. When John eventually found out, he supported the marriage, believing it was a better choice for Julie than living with a dependent parent. Unfortunately, the marriage ended in 1988, and Julie had to move back in with her mother. Despite finding a new job, she did not contribute to her mother's living expenses. Julie became more beautiful than ever, attracting attention every time she was in public. Many people even mistook her for a model and often asked if she was one. Over time, she started to leverage her beauty. Though she felt fragile and vulnerable inside, she was desperately searching for love, but only found brief connections. Many men invited her out on dates and to various events. This trend continued in July 1989, when she attended a stylish party at a yacht owners club. There, she met Timothy "Tim" Nist, a man 11 years her senior. He was a successful businessman who owned his own yacht. In the early 1980s, he started a landscape design company, and his business thrived during the boom of the U.S. real estate market. Julie and Tim's relationship progressed rapidly, but it soon became evident that Julie was very jealous. One day, when Tim was at a bar with another girl, Julie arrived and immediately hit him, leaving a bruise on his face. She also attacked the girl, who was actually Tim's longtime secretary and just an employee helping with the business. Although the situation was tense, the conflict was eventually resolved. Besides, Julie aspired to be a model and saw an advertisement for a beauty contest in a newspaper. Eager to participate, she and Tim gathered her best photos to submit them to the magazine hosting the contest. Unfortunately, they later discovered that the contest was a scam. The magazine used fake ads to collect free photos for their men's section, which was on the last page. One day, Tim arrived at his office to find his secretary absent. To his surprise, Julie was sitting at her desk with a friendly smile, claiming that the secretary would no longer come to work and that Julie had taken over her job. This arrangement allowed Julie to work from home, giving her more freedom and financial independence. Meanwhile, she kept checking her email to see if another magazine had responded to the beauty pageant, but there was no response at all, which made her very frustrated. Eventually, feeling cheated out of her prize, she went to a magazine's office and confronted the editor, demanding an explanation for the lack of recognition for her supposed win. In the end, the editor accepted her photos and promised to include them in the next issue. Julie told everyone about what happened and began to prepare for the competition, which later took place in an elite hotel. At the contest, 12 finalists participated, including Julie. Unfortunately, the judges selected other contestants and only one person voted for her. Despite this setback, Julie formed a friendship with Cheryl Chouplas Hood, the magazine editor, and became this magazine's face, appearing on billboards throughout the city. This exposure increased her popularity, leading to numerous modeling job offers. Julie quickly gained fame, and her career flourished until the fall of 1990. She continued to work for SEMA while winning awards in smaller beauty contests. However, failures awaited her on the big podium. On November 16, 1991, Julie married Tim when she was 23 years old. They enjoyed a comfortable lifestyle and did not deny themselves anything until 1997. Julie's modeling career continued to grow, leading to more income and television appearances. However, she also began to struggle with alcohol abuse. Their marriage had its ups and downs, but overall, they shared love and understanding. Tim wanted children, and they had the financial means to support a family, but Julie was hesitant, fearing it might jeopardize her modeling career. In February 1995, she became pregnant. Despite her friends' concerns, she continued to drink and smoke during this time. On November 26, 1996, she gave birth to a daughter named Katie, which profoundly transformed her life, which Julie willingly accepted. During this time, Julia overcame her addictions and started to actively support her granddaughter. However, they frequently argued about parenting. Soon after, Julie began to struggle with postpartum depression, feeling unhappy because her pregnancy had affected her figure. She became withdrawn and didn't make an effort to return to her former self. Around the same time, her relationship with Tim started to deteriorate, especially in April of that year. They were compelled to see a family psychologist. Julie felt that the therapist favored Tim, but the therapist was actually trying to help her confront her issues and past traumas. Ultimately, the psychologist concluded that Tim was not spending enough time with Julie, putting their marriage at risk. Julie felt lonely and started reaching out to her friends. She came home intoxicated on November 1. This is the 7th year of Tim's annual cruise tradition, which they had maintained since their wedding. This year, they decided to move the trip up to celebrate the Christmas holidays. The cruise was intended to strengthen Julie and Tim's relationship. They left Katie with her grandparents and flew to San Juan, Puerto Rico, where they boarded a cruise ship. Almost immediately, a man named George Skiadopoulos, who worked in the ship's engineering department, noticed Julie. Although he held a low-ranking position, he introduced himself as the captain. The next day, he had made a bet with a friend that he could start a romantic relationship with Julie. At just 22 years old and fresh out of college, George was at the beginning of his engineering career, but he looked respectable enough for Julie to believe him. He falsely claimed to be 28 and fabricated a few accomplishments to impress her. At that time, Julie was 29 years old, and she quickly became close to George. Tim noticed their interactions but was accustomed to Julie being friendly with strangers, so he didn't think much of it and felt no jealousy. Before a party, George offered Julie a tour of the engine room. During the tour, they shared a kiss, but nothing more happened afterward. When Julie returned home, she excitedly told a family friend about her feelings, thinking it was just a brief attraction, since she believed she would never see George again. However, not long after, George sent Julie a seemingly innocent letter, and they began talking on the phone daily. He tried to persuade her that Tim wasn't good enough for her. These conversations were not hidden from Tim. He caught Julie a few times while she was on the phone, but chose to trust her without questioning what they discussed. This situation left Julie feeling conflicted. She was torn between the stability of the family and new sensations with a young lover whom she missed so much, which caused her to become more distant from her husband and daughter. Noticing the change in her behavior, Tim grew concerned and wanted to mend their relationship. On January 3, 1941, he planned a surprise birthday party for her 30th birthday. The celebration went well, with many friends attending. During the party, Julie requested another cruise as a gift, specifying a particular ship and date. Tim was unaware of her true intentions to meet George again. He agreed to her request. On February 13, Julie went on a cruise where she met George. After some intimate moments and returning home, Julie excitedly shared her experience with her friend Tony, who is also the godfather of Katie. Although he was trustworthy, it was hard for Tony to keep this secret to himself. Feeling a deep longing for George, Julie decided to visit him secretly. She framed the trip as a vacation with her mother and daughter. She revealed to her mother about her secret relationship, which led to disapproval. But this could not stop Julie. Initially, the plan was for Julie, Julia, and Katie to go to Florida together. However, by March 26, she left them behind and traveled to Puerto Rico, where she betrayed love of her husband. Upon returning, Julie began to communicate more openly with George. She would frequently talk to him on the phone, send flirty love letters via email, and even create a video sharing snippets of her life. All of this she did without hiding it from Tim, with whom she still lived. Using her husband's earnings, she started going to parties and drinking regularly. Tim noticed these changes and suggested that they see a family psychologist after 7 years of marriage. One day, Julie expressed her desire to break up with Tim, but he opposed the idea. She owned a share in Tim's business, which was generating about $1 million annually. Julie was in dire need of finances as George was planning military service, which in Greece lasts 20 months. She attempted to help George obtain a visa to the USA, but by that time, she could no longer afford it. Struggling with emotional issues, she started taking antidepressants, which made George very angry, and he forbade her from continuing the medication. To impress her new boyfriend, Julie decided to get in shape. However, she had trouble sleeping due to taking sleeping pills and other strong medications, which led her to lose about 10 kg. She hoped to return to modeling to earn money, but George was very jealous and opposed her pursuing this career. Consequently, Julie had to abandon her plans. No one supported her relationship with this Greek man, not even Cheryl, who had previously shown interest in her. In a separate incident, Tim was unable to access a project document. When Julie refused to let him into her room, he had to call the police for help. Despite her resistance, he retrieved what he needed for work. Julie became paranoid, believing that Tim had hired a detective to spy on her. The tension in their home escalated, and it seemed inevitable that they were heading toward a divorce. By midsummer, George and Julie secretly got engaged while they were in the United States. This was done secretly, although she didn't hide from anyone that she was going to move to Greece. During this time, Tim started receiving monthly bills of $67 for international phone calls. Eventually, he discovered that she had been unfaithful to him by an engineer from a cruise ship, and they had been communicating with him behind his back. This revelation made Tim furious, and he decided to expedite the divorce process to eliminate any complications. In response, Julie attempted to restrict Tim's communication with Katie. She aimed to gain full custody so she could leave for another country without any obstacles, which Tim strongly opposed. While they was trying to resolve their issues, Julie's lover George informed her that he had quit his job and planned to visit her in New Jersey. During this time, Julie was under significant stress due to ongoing conflicts with Tim, which even caused her hair to start falling out. However, she believed that all this was due to separation from her beloved. Additionally, she became increasingly paranoid and jealous, demanding constant communication and obsessing over other women in George's life. When George arrived in New Jersey, their relationship took on a more chaotic tone. He frequently asked Julie for money, pressuring her to spend more than she could afford. Because of this, she was forced to take money from Tim, while she completely limited him communication with their daughter. Tim went weeks without seeing her, which drove him to frustration. Meanwhile, George constantly deceived Julie about his financial situation and employment status. It was surprising how unattractive this man was, the beautiful Julie, who literally crouched before him and was ready to give up her well-established life for him. Julie's friends and family were puzzled by her behavior. They tried to convince her to rethink her feelings, as they couldn't comprehend why she would fall for a bald, unemployed man with rotten teeth who was manipulative, deceitful, and excessively jealous. Despite their concerns, Julie seemed infatuated with him. She planned to use her divorce settlement to pay for a professional hair transplant for her boyfriend and fix her own teeth. When Tim learned about her plans, he was outraged, especially since he felt Julie was involving Katie in this situation. He threatened that if she attempted to leave, he would take Katie away, and she would never see their child again. This threat likely dampened Julie's enthusiasm momentarily. She even told her friends that she had ended her relationship with George. However, this was only a temporary setback. A few weeks later, she went to Greece with George to further develop their relationship. During this time, Julie met the parents of George, and they enjoyed the weekend. Because of the religious views of the boyfriend's parents, Julie was forced to hide her marriage and her daughter, as well as her modeling past. When she returned home, she dreamed of a future with her lover. On December 1st, she planned to leave Tim and their shared home. That day, she also left Katie and checked into a hotel. After using a significant amount of psychoactive drugs, Julie traveled to Greece on December 8, 1998. While there, she and her partner made plans for marriage and their life together. George convinced her to open a joint bank account, claiming she needed help with the language barrier. In her infatuation, Julie deposited $80,000 into the account and left an additional $18,000 in cash for expenses. This was all the money she had, and then she vanished without a trace. On January 8, George called Julie's friend to report that she was missing. He said she was supposed to meet him near McDonald's for a snack but never arrived, despite him waiting for several hours. At that time, they didn't have mobile phones to reach her. After a lengthy search, George contacted the police to report his fiancée's disappearance. Shortly before these events, Julie called her friend to express how much she missed Katie and to share that she was having issues with her fiancé, George. The friend sensed that Julie was considering leaving George, and she thought that Julie would return to the US soon. However, Julie never came back. Amid this, George's call was concerning. He informed her friend that Julie had disappeared and left her passport in the car, which the police later took. The problem was that George couldn't locate the officer who had taken the document, making his story seem suspicious. In response, the friend contacted Tim, who was the only one who could provide assistance. Tim quickly understood that Julie was in trouble. The last time she had reached out to her family in the US was on January 7, and since then, no one had heard from her. Julie's mother described George as pathetic. Not only was he unattractive, but he also seemed to lack self-control. There was an incident where George became aggressive towards Julie, when during an argument with Julie, he yelled at her, grabbed her by the throat and pushed her against the wall. He only released her when he heard the threat of police involvement. At this time, Julie attempted to end the relationship. Following this, Julia called the police, and George was deported. But then, despite the circumstances, Julie traveled to Greece to support her boyfriend. She defended him in every way possible, even taking responsibility for the attack. When she learned that Julie was missing, Julia suspected that her daughter's boyfriend was involved in her disappearance. George pretended to help with the search for Julie. During this time, Julie's family tried to reach the American embassy in Athens, but they faced a significant language barrier since no one at the Greek police stations involved in the investigation spoke English. In the United States, the FBI became involved in the case. It was revealed that Julie's passport had been with George the entire time, although he claimed he found it later. When George learned that the FBI was now investigating, he changed his story and said that Julie's documents had been stolen. His behavior grew increasingly suspicious. He attempted to withdraw money from their joint account, but was unsuccessful. The couple was scheduled to get married on January 23, 1999. During this time, news outlets were covering the story of the missing American woman. George became agitated when he spoke on the phone with Julie's friend, who had alerted the media, George insisting he was innocent. He even gave statements to the press and participated in interviews to defend himself. 16 days later, George, the main suspect, was in the interrogation room. He continued to stick to the story he had shared with the media. However, after 4 hours of questioning, the police got him to confess to killing his lover. He claimed that it was an accident. George seemed to genuinely regret the incident, even shedding tears during the interrogation. Despite this, his account was filled with inconsistencies. At times, he insisted that Julie had not disappeared, only to later admit his guilt and then deny any involvement again. George explained that after moving to Greece, Julie quickly became unhappy and missed her home. She expressed a strong desire to return, and despite George's attempts to support her, her distress only deepened, which worried him. In the days leading up to her disappearance, Julie was constantly in tears. Furthermore, George's mother discovered that Julie had an ex-husband and a daughter in America, which made her feel disgusted with Julie. She openly expressed her disapproval to George. He was ultimately persuaded by his mother to leave Julie with such a complicated past. Their relationship was fraught with arguments, and they eventually were evicted from their hotel due to their conflicts. However, George exacerbated the situation. He prevented her from contacting her family and friends and physically abused her. It became evident that his mother struggled with schizophrenia and frequently required hospitalization. A lot of her issues seemed to have been passed down to George, who had an inflated sense of self-worth. As a result, he exhibited arrogant behavior. His manipulative tendencies were often noticed by friends and family. He disappeared at the slightest disagreement and immediately attacked his beloved. Besides, there was an incident where George's mother herself had a badly injured hand. But she justified herself by saying that she accidentally cut herself. Despite the abuse, Julie remained in the relationship. On January 8, 1999, the couple embarked on a long trip to Athens. As they drove along a deserted two-lane highway, their calm conversation spiraled into another argument. George eventually stopped in a remote area of the road where they were isolated from other drivers. George got out of the car and immediately attacked Julie, choking her in an attempt to silence her screams. George later told the police that it felt like he was watching the incident from outside his body. He felt completely powerless and couldn't stop until Julie showed no signs of life. Although he claimed the attack lasted only a few seconds, forensic experts indicated that strangulation typically takes at least 3 minutes. Afterward, George was in shock and contemplated burning her body and scattering the ashes into the sea from a cliff, intending to jump afterward to be with her. However, he ultimately abandoned this plan. Instead, he found himself in an interrogation room, which revealed his guilt. George claimed he had tried to take his own life using an air gun, jumping in front of a truck, and through an overdose of medication, but he was unsuccessful. Following the murder, he treated her body with indifference. He placed her in the trunk of his car and drove to the nearest gas station, where he purchased gasoline. He then returned to the scene, dragged her body away from the road near 2 small lakes, poured gasoline on her, and attempted to set her on fire. However, the fire didn't ignite because it started to rain. At one point, he thought about throwing her body into the lake, but instead placed the charred remains back in the trunk and drove to his grandmother's house. George discovered a large suitcase intended for travel and decided to pack the body inside it. By this time, rigor mortis had already set in, and the body would not bend. Additionally, the head would not fit into the suitcase, so George resorted to cutting it off. He grabbed the head by the hair and raised it to the level of his face, and later confessed to the police that he was horrified by the sight of her vacant eyes. Yet he still found her beautiful. He kissed her on the lips before placing the body into the suitcase. Afterward, he burned the suitcase and discarded it in a swamp, leaving the head behind. George then traveled to Kavala and threw Julie's head into the Aegean Sea. Tim and his family were informed of George's confession 19 days after Julie's disappearance. George, Julie's lover and intended husband, guided detectives to the murder site, where they discovered her remains. Tim traveled to Greece to bring her body back to her homeland. During this time, George confessed to the crime on live television. His mother suffered a stroke upon learning of his actions. Tim's father even remarked that George should have died alongside Julie. Despite this, many articles unfairly blamed Julie for the tragedy. Greek authorities described this murder as one of the most horrific cases known at the time. George's lawyers attempted to argue that he was insane, citing his mother's schizophrenia as a possible reason for his mental state. At one point, George expressed a desire for the death penalty, but Greece does not have capital punishment. In the United States, Tim became a source of support for Julie's family and friends. Despite Julie's infidelity, he proved to be a decent person. Friends of Julie, who remembered her fondly, believed that George initially exploited her for financial gain. When he found out that her husband was rich, he forced her to divorce for a tidy sum that the woman had to invest in his business. Before her death, Julie realized George's true intentions and decided not to invest in his projects, a decision that ultimately cost her life. George's trial began on November 27, 1999. Since 2009, cases in Greece have been heard by 3 judges instead of juries, which has expedited the justice process. Notably, no defense witnesses were present during the hearings. On December 6, the court found George guilty and sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Although it seemed that justice had been served, the Greek legal system faltered. In 2002, George appealed his conviction, claiming he was insane at the time of the murder. His sentence was subsequently reduced to 23 years, and he was granted the right to appeal again. By 2007, he was released and now lives with his new family in Kavala. The case of Julie Scully is a heartbreaking tragedy, with haunting details of the complex relationship. From a happy marriage, she began an affair with George Skiadopoulos, which led to irreparable arguments and conflicts that eventually led to her death. The case is not only a story of personal loss, but also a reflection of the complex elements of love, trust, and power in relationships. The media and public continue to investigate to clarify what really happened, but the story of Julie will forever be a painful reminder of the tragic consequences of toxic relationships. Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case full of unexpected twists. The case of Abigail Hernandez. Abigail Hernandez, commonly known as Abby, was born on October 12, 1998, in Manchester, New Hampshire, USA. She was the second child of her parents, Rubens Hernandez and Xenia. The family had a happy life for many years, but eventually her parents decided to divorce. After the divorce, Abigail and her older sister Sarah moved in with their mother, who worked as a nurse. From a young age, Abigail showed many positive traits. Those who knew her described her as kind, curious, cheerful, and adventurous. She first explored the world of robotics and shortly after began learning German. However, Abigail's true passion was hiking. This was not surprising, as she lived in an ideal location for such activities, North Conway and its surrounding areas, which are known as one of the main spots for hiking and rock climbing in the northeastern United States. The beautiful local landscape continues to draw many tourists who enjoy long walks and outdoor activities. Abigail's high school classmates remember her as a special person who could connect with almost anyone. This ability allowed her to form friendships easily. In 2013, after a busy summer, Abigail returned to school and balanced her daily routine with extracurricular activities, which brought her joy. At that time, she was in a relationship with her boyfriend, Jimmy Campbell, and spent most of her free time with him. Overall, Abigail led a typical life in a beautiful and safe area with a low crime rate, which made her and her loved ones feel secure when they went out or returned home. However, everything changed dramatically when a man named Nathaniel entered her life. Nathaniel Kibbe, known as Nate, lived about 50 kilometers from Conway in Gorham, New Hampshire. He was born on July 15, 1980, and little is known about his family or early life. According to some sources, he attended the same school as Abigail, but many years earlier, meaning they never crossed paths within the school walls or outside of it. During his school years, most of Nathaniel's classmates viewed him as very aggressive and cruel. Reports from peers indicated that he kept a list of names of future victims, primarily fellow students. Additionally, Nathaniel often claimed to be part of a gang called the Vipers, and he was generally regarded as someone not to be trifled with. As Nathaniel grew older, he seemed to change on the surface. He got a job at a company that specialized in mechanical processing and manufacturing. People who knew him during this time saw him as disciplined, and his colleagues and supervisors regarded him as an exemplary employee. However, they were unaware of his dark past. Previously, Nathaniel had attempted to abduct a 16-year-old girl who was trying to get on a school bus. He also had multiple encounters with law enforcement due to banned substance possession. Furthermore, he was involved in various firearm-related incidents and was often caught lying while trying to buy them from specialty shops. This is just a glimpse of his troubling history. Some reports indicate that Nathaniel lived with a 13-year-old girl for several months, claiming she was his girlfriend and openly acknowledging the inappropriate nature of their relationship. In reality, such a relationship between an adult and a minor is a serious crime. Nathaniel's neighbors in the trailer park kept their distance from him. While they didn't see him as an immediate threat, they didn't trust him because of his questionable behavior. On October 9, 2013, Abigail left school and, as usual, went for a walk. Unfortunately, one of her birthday gifts, hiking boots she wanted to wear for her 15th birthday, caused her discomfort. They rubbed against her feet, leading to painful blisters that made walking difficult. Nevertheless, she felt she had no choice but to continue on her way, trying to distract herself from the pain while enjoying the scenery and thoughts about the upcoming holiday. Later, her boyfriend Jimmy texted her again to express his love. Abigail replied with a heart emoji. Abigail's school is not far from home, but her usual walk became long and painful because her feet were chafed. She had to focus on each step, trying to place her feet gently on the ground. So, she felt genuinely frightened when she heard a car approaching. The driver was Nathaniel, who was unusually friendly and welcoming. He offered Abigail a ride, but she politely declined since she didn't know him. However, Nathaniel insisted, noticing that she was clearly uncomfortable. When she explained that her new shoes had caused blisters, he suggested that if she kept walking, her feet would hurt even more, which made Abigail hesitate. He then opened the passenger door of his car, and Abigail reluctantly sat in that position. As Nathaniel started the car, he began asking her various questions. At first, everything seemed fine to Abigail. However, he soon mentioned that he needed to stop at a hardware store to buy a few items for his house. He then drove into the parking lot of a large hardware store and parked in a secluded area away from the entrance. By this point, Abigail was feeling quite nervous, but tried to stay calm and act naturally. She even tried to convince Nathaniel that her house was close enough for her to walk, but when he heard this, Nathaniel insisted even more that he would take her home as they had initially agreed. At that moment, tension filled the air as Abigail decided to unbuckle her seatbelt and try to escape the car. However, Nathaniel quickly reacted to her movement in an unexpected way. He grabbed her shirt with one hand and pulled a weapon from the glove compartment with the other, aiming it directly at her. In a matter of seconds, the situation escalated dramatically, and Abigail realized she was in real danger. Nathaniel not only kept the weapon pointed at her, but also threatened to hurt her. Feeling trapped, Abigail understood that she needed to stay calm and comply with him. After a few minutes, Nathaniel placed a large baseball cap on Abigail's head and bound her hands with tourniquets. He then started the car and drove off. At some point, Nathaniel noticed that Abigail was constantly looking towards the road, positioning her head in such a way that the baseball cap was not limiting. This angered him, and he used a stun weapon on her, causing her to lose consciousness. When Abigail regained her senses, she found herself in a dark, small room without windows. The only thing she could see was a poster on the wall featuring a snake with the words, "Don't step on me." A few minutes later, Nathaniel blindfolded her with tape, tied her hands with plastic straps, and placed a motorcycle helmet on her head. Once he ensured she was completely immobilized and helpless, he removed her clothes and coerced her into intimacy for the first time. From that day on, Nathaniel held the girl captive, indulging in his worst instincts and subjecting her to various forms of abuse. He also threatened to harm her family and friends if she attempted to escape or tell anyone about her situation. Typically, Abigail returned home after dinner, but when 7:00 p.m. arrived and she was still absent, her mother became very concerned. She asked her eldest daughter, Sarah, if Abigail had mentioned any plans to go out. Unfortunately, Sarah had no information to provide. Xenia then tried to call her daughter, but it seemed Abigail's phone was turned off. Given these circumstances, Xenia felt compelled to contact the police to report her daughter missing. Immediately, law enforcement officials used the existing missing child search protocol. Meanwhile, Xenia and Sarah contacted several of Abigail's friends in the hope that one of them might know where she was. However, none of these measures produced the desired results. There was no one who could give them any information that would help them find her, and Nathaniel was the only person who knew where she was. In addition, Nathaniel understood perfectly well that any mobile phone could be tracked, so he almost immediately smashed Abigail's phone. Thus, the local authorities and her relatives were desperately searching for her, while she was in Nathaniel's power. When Nathaniel spent time with the victim, he tried to turn on the music at full volume so that no one would hear her screams. In fact, the acts of physical aggression from Nathaniel were quite common. Nathaniel used all sorts of tactics to intimidate Abigail in order to keep her under his control. For example, the aggressor constantly told her that if she behaved well, he would not cause her much harm. Along with this, he affirmed that without any hesitation, he would take her life and also her family if the situation required it. So Abigail could only pray. She repeated to herself over and over again that she needed to calm down and try to analyze her situation. She focused on one goal: she needed to do everything possible to save her life. She believed the best strategy might be to get closer to her kidnapper. Enduring bullying from him, Abigail tried to lower his guard. Whenever she could, she spoke to him calmly, insisting that she didn't judge his actions. She also mentioned that everyone makes mistakes and promised to keep quiet about the incident if he set her free. However, all her attempts to get closer to Nathaniel were completely unsuccessful. It seemed that the man was even becoming more cruel than before. The room where Nathaniel kept Abigail was nearly soundproof, resembling a modernized cargo container. There were no windows, making it impossible for her to connect with the outside world. To further isolate her, Nathaniel put up a sign on the front door that read, "Strangers, entry is prohibited." While this seemed odd to his neighbors, they didn't pay much attention, as Nathaniel had always been considered peculiar, and it was his property. During her time with Abigail, he indulged in his disturbing desires, subjecting she to various forms of physical and psychological manipulation. Despite her dire situation, Abigail held on to hope that she would eventually escape this nightmare. She remained determined and focused on a strategy to soften her captor. Gradually, she made some progress. At one point, Nathaniel even allowed her to stay in his trailer, marking a shift in their relationship. Meanwhile, in Conway, posters about Abigail's disappearance were plastered everywhere. Although, despite the local authorities' efforts, they found no specific leads to help locate her. The search for Abigail proved to be extremely challenging. Her disappearance sparked significant public concern, and many people have been closely following the developments of this case. Abigail's relatives were at a loss about what to do next. Although they remained determined to find her, their hope was slowly diminishing. Nathaniel and Abigail also were closely following the news about the case, as it was frequently covered on television. which kept her hope for rescue alive. However, Nathaniel began to feel increasingly uneasy as time passed. Posters with Abigail's image only multiplied in the media, which regularly showed her data, including both a description of her appearance and contact numbers to call in case of any information related to the case. The search for Abigail had become one of the largest in New Hampshire's history. Meanwhile, she continued to endure her worst nightmare. While her search became more intense, the authorities still could not find anything worthwhile to direct their efforts in the right direction. They had already questioned Jimmy, thinking he might have information about her disappearance. However, Jimmy cooperated with the police and confirmed his alibi. A month had passed since Abigail went missing. Her mother was beginning to lose hope. She hadn't checked her mailbox in weeks, but when Xenia sorted through the accumulated letters, she found one from her daughter. Dated October 22, 2013, the letter read approximately, "Dear Mom, I miss you and love you more than you can imagine. I'm sorry about everything that's happened. I've seen the news reports. To answer your questions, I want you to know that I am alive, well, and safe. Even though I miss you dearly, I can't share my location right now. Please stay strong for me, as I am staying strong for you. I've realized that patience, hope, and courage can make a difference. Don't lose hope. Keep moving forward, and remember me. I believe everything will work out for us. I love you. Please give Sarah a hug for me, and tell her I love and miss her very much." Dreams come true. The authorities analyzed this letter, trying to find at least some clue that could lead them to Abigail. Unfortunately, they found nothing useful. They only managed to confirm that this letter was indeed written by Abigail. At least they were completely sure that it was her handwriting. But none of them suspected that this letter was Nathaniel's idea. He thought that it could stop the search or slow down the investigation. In fact, this was not the first letter Abigail had written. She had previously crafted another letter and managed to create a secret message by pressing her nails into the paper. This hidden message contained words asking for help, but they were not easily visible. Nathaniel somehow discovered Abigail's attempt to communicate and punished her severely for it. Then he forced her to write the very letter that Xenia eventually received. For a long time, the letter's contents were kept secret, but many news outlets began to spread rumors that Abigail had willingly run away from home because she might be pregnant. Consequently, almost everyone in the city, including Abigail's classmates, discussed the escape. Abigail's best friend later expressed her outrage at this theory. She believed with certainty that her friend was not expecting a child, and felt that Abigail was not the type to shy away from tough situations. Both Abigail's family and the investigators were convinced that she was in serious danger. 6 weeks after her daughter's disappearance, Xenia spoke to journalists, hoping to inspire her daughter with positivity. She firmly believed that Abigail was alive and thought she might see her on television. "I know that hope is stronger than fear. I hope one day you can reach out to me. I feel your presence in my life every day, and I wish for your safe return home as soon as possible." Unfortunately, days turned into weeks and weeks into a month, with law enforcement still no closer to solving the case. However, they did gather enough evidence to conclude that Abigail was being held against her will. Meanwhile, the relationship between Abigail and Nathaniel was growing stronger. Although it took some time, Abigail managed to earn Nathaniel's trust. He even involved her in one of his illegal activities, working on counterfeit banknotes. Despite this, Abigail was still subjected to physical abuse and insults. Months passed, and the investigation yielded no significant leads. Xenia and Sarah continued to feel sadness and despair. At Nathaniel's house, life continued normally. Despite spending a long time captive, Abigail never discovered the true identity of her captor. She called him by a simple word, the owner. Nathaniel often surprised her with his unpredictable behavior and emotional shifts. Recently, their interactions had included more calm moments, leading Abigail to believe that he might not be as cruel as he once appeared. However, this perception changed dramatically when Nathaniel placed a makeshift collar around Abigail's neck and activated it, sending a strong electric shock through her weakened body. When she regained consciousness, Nathaniel warned her that he would take action if she attempted to escape. By mid-January 2014, Abigail had been held captive for over 6 months. Perhaps her relationship with Nathaniel remained the same as before. Undoubtedly, there was a certain connection between them. However, she was still at a disadvantage, and Nathaniel tried to keep his cool. At this time, some progress was made. For instance, Nathaniel allowed Abigail to read and even gave her several books, which may have been his first mistake. One of the cookbooks at Nathaniel's house had his name on it, and Abigail noticed this. When she addressed him by name, Nathaniel was genuinely surprised and asked how she knew it. Abigail truthfully replied that she saw his name on the book's cover. Being honest was part of her strategy to build a connection with her kidnapper. She hoped that one day Nathaniel would decide to let her go, or someone would simply find her. Abigail has been locked in a soundproof box for very long, and now she is closer to freedom than ever. So interesting. Her potential rescue was not due to her actions, but rather because Nathaniel had been involved in a minor traffic accident. Realizing that it was only a matter of time before the authorities showed up at his door, he decided to call the nearest police station and offered to cooperate. As a result, law enforcement arrived at his home and discovered a large stash of firearms of various calibers. In this situation, Nathaniel willingly surrendered the weapons to the authorities. He allowed the police to search his trailer multiple times. Again and again, police officers went in and out, passing only a few meters from the container in which Abigail was located, but because of his cooperative behavior, she remained captive. Despite Abigail being missing for a long time, her family and the authorities continued to search for her, hoping she was still alive. Nathaniel seemed unfazed by the situation. He would leave his house during the day and return in the evening, without worrying that Abigail might attempt to escape. However, some of Nathaniel's actions changed the situation. He met a woman, and they eventually became intimate. During their conversation, she revealed that she was struggling financially and couldn't afford her rent. Nathaniel decided to help her by giving her some money. Later, while shopping at a supermarket, and it should be said that she was genuinely surprised when the cashier told her that her $50 were counterfeit. She had to abandon her items at the checkout and leave the store quickly. After returning home, she called Nathaniel and took out her frustration on him. She also advised him to dispose of all the counterfeit money he had at home, since the police were expected to visit him soon. Of course, she had no idea her call would have significant consequences for Abigail. When their conversation ended, Nathaniel went into a panic and decided he needed to eliminate anything that could lead to his arrest. Most of all, more than the potential charges of counterfeiting, he was primarily anxious about possible accusations related to Abigail's kidnapping and regular crimes against her personal safety. So, on July 20, 2014, fearing he would be caught, Nathaniel returned almost all of Abigail's belongings. He then placed her in the passenger seat of his car and put the same baseball cap on her that she had worn on the day of her kidnapping. After that, Nathaniel started the car, and they drove together for several hours. Eventually, he stopped and ordered Abigail to get out. He threatened her one last time that he would come back for her, cause pain and suffering to her loved ones if she told anyone about what happened to her or reported him to the police. This is how Abigail found freedom. Later, Abigail reflected that she couldn't tell if what she was experiencing was a dream or reality. However, once she regained her senses, she began walking towards a house, Along the road, she for a long time couldn't believe that she was free. After enduring 9 months of confinement and trauma, she was finally able to return home. As walking to her house, she heard the familiar voice of her mother, who was talking to someone on the phone. When Abigail stepped inside and shouted, "Mom," Xenia was overwhelmed with disbelief at hearing her daughter's voice again after so many months. She even asked for confirmation, trying to ensure it was really her. Later that evening, Xenia urged Abigail to share everything that had happened to her. Threats from Nathaniel quite quickly surfaced in her memory. She constantly avoided details about the identity of her kidnapper. After discussing the situation, Xenia and Abigail decided to contact the police. However, during the police interview, Abigail once again withheld information about her kidnapper, fearing he might return and harm her family. After the police questioned Abigail, the news of her release from captivity gradually spread throughout the area. When Abigail returned home from the police station, she took a bath and then lay down in her own bed. It still felt like a dream, but the horrifying memories brought her back to reality. In that moment, she felt exhausted, and for the first time in a long while, Abigail was able to truly relax, feeling safe. The next day was equally strange for her. On one hand, she wanted to return to her normal life and engage in her favorite activities. On the other hand, she was still plagued by fear and anxiety at the thought of Nathaniel possibly reappearing in her life. The following days passed in a similar manner, and Abigail sensed that her sense of freedom was not yet complete. Perhaps that is why on July 27, 2014, she could not stand it and confessed to her mother that she had deliberately hidden all the information about the man who had kidnapped her. She suggested that they should speak to the police again, which they did. The officers welcomed Abigail's new statement, which proved crucial for the investigation. After Abigail shared everything she knew about Nathaniel, the authorities began preparing an operation to capture him quickly. The following day, the police arrived at Nathaniel's home, surrounded his trailer, and ordered him to surrender. Surprisingly, Nathaniel did not resist arrest. After his arrest, Nathaniel was taken to the police station for questioning. Meanwhile, a thorough search was conducted at his residence, and the police officers did not leave any corner unattended, collecting all the evidence that was of even the slightest relate to the investigation. During the interrogation, Nathaniel requested a lawyer and denied any involvement in the charges against him. The preliminary hearing on this case took place the very next day after the arrest, and in the days that followed, Nathaniel appeared in court multiple times to review the evidence presented by the prosecution. By this point, there was no doubt that he was responsible for the horrific events in Abigail's life. On August 12, 2014, Nathaniel's lawyers filed a motion for his release in court, and unexpectedly, the judge in Kona approved it. However, Nathaniel was prohibited from contacting the victim, Abigail, or her family. He had to stay at least 100 meters away from them. The main trial began in mid-December 2014, with Abigail and her family sitting in the front row at the prosecutor's table, closely observing the defense's arguments. At that time, Nathaniel was being held at the Carroll County Correctional Facility and faced over 180 charges related to Abigail's case. The next court hearing occurred on May 26, 2016, nearly 2 years after Nathaniel's arrest. By then, he had accepted a plea deal and was prepared to admit his guilt, which aimed to avoid a lengthy trial and provided him with some legal advantages. A particularly emotional moment in the trial came when Abigail delivered her final statement. She shared that she had resumed her studies, social life, and sports activities. Then she turned her gaze to Nathaniel and told him that even though he was a real monster to her, but he would always be a man who simply made the wrong choice. It seemed that Abigail wanted Nathaniel to understand that she forgave him. Continuing her speech, Abigail expressed her deep regret that things had not turned out differently, but she acknowledged that her family's safety was paramount. After all, it wasn't she who sent Nathaniel to prison. Abigail believed that he had put himself in such a position when he decided to keep her captive. All this was his own decision. She concluded her speech by thanking Nathaniel, who had helped her through this ordeal, explaining that the experience had made her appreciate her life and freedom much more. Then she turned to Nathaniel and her mother. Xenia told Nathaniel that despite the fact that part of her soul sincerely hated him, she also wanted to thank him for not harming her daughter's life. After Abigail's words, Nathaniel Kibbe pleaded guilty to 7 felony charges, including kidnapping and abuse. He will serve 45 to 90 years in prison. Meanwhile, Abigail was able to return to a normal life sometime after Nathaniel's trial. A few years later, she moved to a new county, started a family, and had a child. In an interview, she shared that during the 9 months she was held captive, she was determined to survive. She also mentioned that forgiveness played a crucial role in helping her return to a normal life, and she considered it the best form of revenge against her kidnapper.